Make no mistake. War is coming. With all its glory. And all its horror. Mr. Findlay, your freedom awaits.
Hell, it's about time.
StarCraft 2 is a very important game to me. For years I had anticipated its release, being an enormous Blizzard fanboy when I was growing up. And in 2010, when the game dropped, it was everything I could have ever hoped for and more. Today we're going to talk about StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty. We're going to use the campaign as a lens to discuss multiple things, not just the game, but the fact that StarCraft 2 in the early 2010s was a cultural juggernaut. It was on TV, airliners, and even sparked the creation of multiple billion-dollar industries that thrive to this day. But before we get there, we need to start at the beginning. Meet Jim Raynor. We begin Wings of Liberty with Jim drinking alone at Joey Ray's bar. Once a high-minded rebel, Jim is a shadow of his former self. While trying to overthrow the corrupt Confederacy, he inadvertently helped install the equally tyrannical Arcturus Mengsk into power. Sarah Kerrigan, the woman he loved, was betrayed to the Zerg and infested into their ranks, enslaved by the Overmind. And once the Overmind was slain by the alien Protoss, Kerrigan's will was freed. She gathered allies, including Raynor, only to betray them, killing many of Jim's close Terran and Protoss friends, declaring herself the Queen of Blades. With a bounty on his head from the Terran Dominion, Raynor decides it's time to take action.
Adjutant, are my troops ready yet?
Your forces are prepared and awaiting your orders, Commander.
Good. About time we kick this revolution into overdrive.
Liberation Day is the first tutorial mission, and things start off very simple. We get 5 Marines and Jim Raynor himself, who is a higher hit point, stronger Marine. The objective is to reach the Dominion Logistics headquarters and smash it. Every RTS needs a mission that teaches the players to select units, move, and attack. Some put these into small tutorials, some in the first mission. It's good that this exists, but nothing to write home about. After the first skirmish, we find a Dominion propaganda holoboard and get our first bonus objective of the game. Find and destroy 6 of them. So I do. The path takes a winding S shape around the map, and at the halfway point, we encounter a tiny event where allied Marines are dropped into the action to reinforce. The map then opens up, a few holoboards are scattered around to find, and once that's done, we can move on to the second event. The Dominion are gathering up civilians to bring them to some sort of mining site. Raynor's raiders swoop in, clean up the guards, and liberate the civilians. Then comes the single most egregious sin in all of Wings of Liberty. We destroy the 2 remaining Dominion holoboards, completing the bonus objective, and get nothing. This is so lame. Why does the very first bonus objective of this campaign give you nothing? I know it's not that big of a deal, but it's a pet peeve of mine. How dare you, Blizzard Entertainment? How dare you? Anyway, with the civilians freed and armed, the raiders breach the final Dominion base, torch the garrison, and mow through the defending Viking transformers. The logistics headquarters is razed to the ground, and the rebellion has begun. Back in Joey Ray's bar, Jim is drinking alone again, when the door to the bar opens and a mysterious Marine approaches. The Outlaw has been found. But who else would know where to look for him than his old buddy Tychus Finlay? Tychus tells Jim how he busted out of prison to avoid his life sentence and now has a very enticing opportunity to make some money. The Dominion's been digging up some ancient alien artifacts and they've already found what they're looking for.
But I got a contact that'll pay top dollar for every artifact we liberate from the Dominion.
After that chat, the game moves into the hub section that occurs in between missions. There are 3 hubs throughout the campaign, and the first one is pretty tiny, just being Joey Ray's bar. There are a few clickables with snippets of dialogue, a short conversation with Tychus where he tells Jim how he broke out of jail, and of course the news, which unironically is one of the best parts of this game and is going to need its own section later. But for now, the people of Marsara have been liberated from the Dominion, and it's time to do the same for that alien artifact. Hopping into the second mission, we're met with what might be one of the most quintessential StarCraft experiences. A command center, some SCVs for mining and constructing, and some Marines for shooting. Compared to many other real-time strategy games, resources in StarCraft are very simple. There are mineral fields that can be mined by SCVs, Vespene gas geysers that can also be mined but require a refinery to be built on top first, and supply, which is generated by constructing supply depots and command centers. A lot of strategy in StarCraft comes not from balancing the incomes to get the army you want, but balancing a proper army composition around what resources you're given. In this case, we have a lot of mineral fields but only one gas geyser, which fits perfectly with the 2 units we have unlocked. The Marine only costs minerals, and the Medic is fairly gas reliant. Marines are general purpose damage dealers that can hit ground and air, and Medics heal. A nice and simple army for the introduction to production. After building up a bit and defending some attacks, we get a bonus objective. A group of rebels halfway between me and the enemy are under fire. If we rescue them, they'll join us. Once I have a balanced composition of Marines and Medics, it's time to move out. The main road snakes through the map with some resource pickups in pockets to the side. I grab the bonus objective to reinforce and move towards the objective where a group of Hellions dive. Unlike the infantry we currently use and have been facing, Hellions were not in StarCraft 1, so the game makes a bit of fanfare about them, before they explode. Then comes a bunker loaded with Marines as a small obstacle before the well-defended final base, which includes a nestled-away siege tank that bombards from a range. Overall, this mission is very simple, as a tutorial should be, but does some things very well. The resource pickups around the map encourage exploring, and the bonus objective halfway down the map encourages you to move out. And because it's Terran versus Terran, it uses the enemy to show off some of the tools that you're going to be getting later, like the Hellions and the bunker. These are all great things, but it wasn't until I started making this review that I realized that this tutorial is subtly more clever than it seems. We all know that repetition while slowly introducing new concepts is the foundation to human learning. While gamers love repeating the same thing over and over again, the minute you try to force them to do so, they disengage and get angry. But look at these last 2 missions. Navigating an S-shaped hallway with a major event at the midpoint, a few minor things to look for in corners but nothing major. Once you reach the end, there's a minor obstacle followed by a main base that's stronger. Blizzard subtly tricked everybody into playing the same mission twice in a row, with the first playthrough teaching the basic RTS controls and then the second acting as a tutorial for resource collection and production. This is repetition learning without the feeling of repetition, which is very clever game design. Wings of Liberty in general is filled with a lot of these clever design details. The team obviously put a lot of care into the new player experience, making a very inaccessible genre easier to get into. I'm going to highlight as many of these as I can as we go through, however, I probably will miss some because they're so subtle. Once the base has gone down, Jim and Tychus have taken control of the artifact and reconvene for a final time at Joey Ray's bar. Now that they have the goods, it's time to get off-world. Jim's got transport lined up, but things suddenly get a bit complicated. The Zerg are here and they're headed straight towards the artifact. The Swarm has been docile since Kerrigan ascended to being the Queen of Blades, but this is a concerted, coordinated assault. 0 Hour begins the first classic Terran holdout mission, and finally we get to fight some non-Terran enemies. There are 2 bridges we can lay some bunkers behind, which can be manned with infantry to fire out. We also get missile turrets, which are a dedicated anti-flyer structure that don't require any manning. Together, bunkers and turrets make the core of the Terran static defense package, and the SCV's ability to repair them makes them exceptionally durable. The majority of the mission is defending at home, but 3 times we get a bonus objective to rescue some stranded infantry and bring them back. This entire process really shows off Terran's anchor and chain style of play. The entire faction is comprised of massively powerful but slow or completely immobile emplacements that are then supplemented by more mobile and cheaper forces that can go out, get stuff done, and then be back to help the defense if necessary. There are many different iterations of this idea that we'll see later, but Terran has a core solid concept that just feels good to play. Overall, 0 Hour is a mission where not that much happens for a long while. The defensive position we're given is exceptionally strong, and the mission exists to get players familiar with Terran defenses, so it can't be too crazy off the bat. But that doesn't mean things don't get pretty tricky near the end. But before we get to that endgame, there's one more thing we gotta do. Far to the north through a Zerg base is an outhouse with a Tauren Space Marine Easter egg. We gotta get this bad boy into space. Perfect, we'll see him later. Back to the mission. The end of 0 Hour is legitimately intense. Zerg stream across both bridges in huge numbers, while Mutalisk flyers hit from different angles. Drop pods deliver small Zerglings straight into your base. The mission forces you to get acquainted with Terran defense, or you're just going to die. And this isn't me sensationalizing. Just a few weeks ago, the player Hero Marine, you know, the second best Terran player in Europe, played this mission for the first time, and this is what the end looked like for him.
It's actually close, isn't it? Wait. Huh? Ooh, does that count as a win?
Once the timer hits 0, Jim's battlecruiser the Hyperion arrives to rescue us. And then we get a pretty sweet in-engine cinematic introducing the second-in-command Matt Horner as the Hyperion fights off the Zerg and jumps away from the planet. Honestly, 14 years later and even the non-pre-rendered stuff still looks pretty solid. Once everybody is safe on board the Hyperion, they take stock of the situation. The Zerg assault on Mar Sara is not a one-off. The Swarm is simultaneously invading all of the Outer Rim planets. Terran casualties are already in the billions. And Kerrigan, the Queen of Blades herself, is leading the invasion. So, welcome to the Hyperion! This is going to be the crew's main hub for the majority of the campaign. Most of it is still locked down, but we'll be taking this bad boy across the sector for loads of hijinks and artifact hunting. And there are a decent number of crew members, but for now, the second-in-command Matt Horner is wondering why Tychus is still in his marine suit now that we're out of the action. Tychus comes clean. The Mobius Foundation helped bust him out of prison, and in return, he's bolted into this suit until he delivers them some alien artifacts. Matt is instantly not a fan of Tychus, but it's clear right now that one capital ship and revolutionaries are not going to win this war against the Zerg. They need to build up their forces so they can win a fight when it counts. And to do that, working with Mobius is the best idea. Over in the armory, we meet the lead engineer Swan, who we'll talk more about later. More importantly, we get access to the armory panel, where we can spend credits to get permanent upgrades to our units and structures. I grab combat shields for my Marines that gives them 10 additional hit points, and then all that's left to do is jump into a mission. And this is where Wings of Liberty really changes things up from almost every RTS ever. A distressed beacon is sent from the planet Agria, who are being overwhelmed by Zerg and need help. And Tychus has a lead on more artifacts on a world called Monolith, and we get to choose which planet we go to. This is not an exclusive choice. We will eventually be able to go everywhere if we want to, but prioritizing what units we unlocked, who we help, and all those sorts of things are completely within the player's control. I have no notes to this system. It is perfect. Actually, I do have notes. We're going to be talking a lot about it as time goes on, and everything is going to be positive about it. But for now, obviously the distress call about the Zerg is a little bit more important than artifact hunting, so let's head to Agria and meet Dr. Ariel Hanson. I'm sure she's great. In the briefing room, we're shown that the colonists of Agria are being decimated. We need to help escort them to the nearby starport so we can get them off-world. I assume that in lore, there's just like a bajillion of them or something, and that's why we can't pick them all up with the Hyperion, otherwise this mission would be very silly. As the mission begins, we're given the Firebat, whose disappointment I will talk about in a bit, but I do like that before we're given a base, we get to explore a bit, and there's some pockets of money that you can find if you're really looking around. Once we reach the colony, we get a base, and the escorts start moving out. I really like for this mission how the game gives you options. There are abandoned bunkers on the roads near some of the Zerg attack paths, and we can man them up, or use a mobile defensive force to stick with the transport. I opt to do a little bit of both, mainly because I'm afraid of commitment. The first escort goes off without a hitch, and right at the end, we find a weird Zerg chrysalis that unlocks a bonus objective that gives us Zerg research. This is going to be the large majority of the game's bonus objectives. There are between 2 and 4 little doodads on every map, and they give research points that can be spent later. That's it. It is a functional bonus objective system. The researches themselves are actually quite fun, and it does encourage exploring around the map, but it is a far cry from the exciting things that you would get to do in games like Warcraft 3. Instead, StarCraft 2's mission design is incredibly focused, and often that focus is good. But I do feel like a little bit of spice occasionally would be very welcome. Another thing that would be welcome is the Firebat being good. This new infantry unit that we unlocked in theory is a bulky frontline anti-Zergling fighter, and they suck. There are going to be a few units in this run that are originally from StarCraft 1 and don't have a place in StarCraft 2 multiplayer, and they tend to not get the love that the rest of the units do. Firebats are slow and clunky and do not attack well. As you can see, when the APC that I'm transporting dies, they're not great at killing Zerglings, and that's all they're supposed to be good against. Fortunately, the game's thoughtful mission design comes in to save us here. If the APC dies, the colonists will get out and try to book it to the objective. They might be exposed and squishy and slow, but they do keep going, which is great. We're allowed to let a total of 20 colonists die, and the APC only counts as 1. We have to get 50 to the starport, which generally is 5 escort waves, but sometimes if you lose a lot, it could be 6. The remainder of the mission acts as an introduction to the Zerg, particularly the different ways that they attack. Of course, they come in from the different sides with the bunkers, but they also use underground burrow ambushes, drop pods to fall from the skies, and nidus worms erupting from the ground. Each escort uses a different tactic, which gives the mission both a lot of flavor and helps introduce how the Zerg units are not individually impressive, but the masses of the swarm will find a way to get into your face no matter what. Another thing I like is how time visibly passes throughout the mission. As the escorts continue, the sun begins to set and daytime turns into an orange twilight as the shadows get longer. This doesn't change the mission mechanics at all, it's entirely for vibes, and I think that's perfect. The escorting mission design is very interesting to me. Back in 2010, when I was absolutely horrible, I found this mission to be incredibly hard. Making stuff and staying with a slow-moving APC was legitimately very tough for me. But these days, I'm a slightly better player, and I would consider Evacuation to be the easiest non-tutorial mission in the game. Usually getting better makes all missions easier, but it's interesting to see how some missions get drastically easier than others as you hit various thresholds of skill level. Once I've gotten the final bonus objectives, it's time for the final few APC waves. And once again, that kind mission design strikes. We need to bring a total of 50 colonists to the starport, and they start coming in groups of 10. But as I mentioned, I lost some APCs earlier. But after the first 3 waves, larger groups of colonists end up being sent out. Losing a few civilians doesn't punish you with a full additional escort, only complete destruction of a convoy does that. And I think that's just fair. Eventually, our defenses are too strong, the Zerg futilely wash against our bunkers, and the final APC arrives to the starport, launching the colonists off as we return to the Hyperion. And to meet us there is our new best friend, Dr. Ariel Hanson. Yay!
Great to have you, Doc. How you planning on pitching in?
Well, your medical facilities are medieval, and your science expertise is non-existent. Perhaps I could start there.
Ouch.
Dr. Hanson is kinda mean. We haven't met Egon Stetman yet, but his science credentials and lab do not deserve this sort of smack talking. Getting away from the doctor as fast as possible, we move to the cantina and unlock another gameplay mechanic: mercenaries. Buying their contracts now make them available during missions, so I grab the Devil Dog Firebat mercenary contract and am given the Warpig mercenary contract for free. Back on the Hyperion Bridge, we have a pair of new missions. A mysterious man named Gabriel Tosh is looking to work together, and there's a follow-up to the colonist questline with Dr. Hanson. But Tychus has been waiting oh so patiently, so we're gonna do his mission. And I figure this is a pretty good time that we finally meet the third StarCraft faction, the Protoss. At first, Smash and Grab looks simple. The Protoss are guarding an artifact and we need to grab it, but it looks like the Zerg have the same idea. We're not strong enough to fight both enemies at once, but we can sneak in while they're fighting each other, grab the artifact, and get out while no one's looking. Smash and Grab is a very simple mission that does a lot of intelligent things that fixes some of the major issues from StarCraft 1. The biggest one being Terran and Protoss fighting. Both of the StarCraft games have the omnipresent threat of the Zerg as a core focus. And fairly naturally, this means that narratively the Protoss and Terran tend to either work together against the Zerg or at minimum give each other some leeway. As a result, throughout the 56 missions in the first game, only 5 involve playing as Terran against Protoss or Protoss against Terran. Meanwhile, of those 56 missions, you play 43 either as or against the Zerg, which is 76%. It was not diverse or balanced. The way that Wings of Liberty fixes this issue is by introducing the Tal'Darim, a group of fanatic Protoss who will become progressively more important throughout StarCraft 2 and are not friendly to anybody. So now we can both fight the Protoss and not feel very bad doing it. Unlike the fast and swarmy Zerg, Protoss are big, powerful, heavy-hitting enemies. And to punch through their armor, we're given the Marauder, a big boy infantryman with a grenade launcher. Unlike every other grenade launcher in video game history, these do not do splash damage and are not good against swarms of enemies. Please do not question why this is. Dustin Browder will haunt your dreams if you try. Marauders are good units now and great units later. Their massive durability makes the infantry blob far less vulnerable to area damage, which Marines are pretty weak against. And down the road, we can upgrade them at the armory to give a slowing effect to their attacks. To round out the infantry armor even further, we have the mercenaries from earlier. We now start production missions with a merc compound. Every few minutes, a group of units whose contract has been bought on the Hyperion is available for purchase. We get a squad of elite versions of standard units with buff stats, and they're fantastic. For example, I was whining about how the 100 HP Firebat is just not tanky enough for the cost, but the 160 HP Elite Devil Dog is absolutely worth it. Mercenaries are a quick way to round out your composition with various units, but you can't entirely rely on them due to having a 5 or more minute cooldown and limited charges. I like the system, it fits Rainer's Raiders vibe really well. While I've been blabbering, the Zerg have been attacking. They're pushing a lane to the north, and we can attack the Protoss to the south. This dynamic where the Protoss player is being hit from two different sides and we have perfect vision of it creates a time pressure to get on the map and get stuff done, which is something I think is very healthy for an RTS game to have. A lot of older RTS have a problem where the optimal way to play almost every mission is to sit around and build an uber death army and then steamroll through the enemy. But giving a strict time limit feels very artificial and cheap. This sort of mission design where the time pressure is organically woven into the mission and you need to watch the fighting and figure out things based on vibes is so much nicer. It encourages us to move out in a way that fits with the story and the theme of the mission. By the way, I'm not saying that there's no place for building giant death armies. It is absolutely an important part of the game, but variety is the spice of life. There's room in RTS for small skirmishes and big massive death armies. Another thing I like is that the game doesn't explicitly tell you what the Protoss are or what they do. Instead, it just sets up simple things like this bridge puzzle. An inattentive player will run up, the sentries will teach about force fields, and then the High Templar will reinforce that teaching with a nice Psystorm. But a slower, more methodical player can use Marauders to destroy these exposed pylons, depowering the defensive photon cannons, leaving the High Templar and sentry vulnerable. I appreciate when a game is willing to electrocute you in the name of teaching. Really makes the lesson stick, doesn't it? After clearing the bridge, the rest of the mission is pretty simple. A few small Protoss defenses, each using a variety of new units and showing off the warp-in mechanic. And then their main base is moderately defended, but nothing serious. After grabbing all the Protoss relic bonus objectives, we have officially done the mission smashing, and now is time for the grabbing. But oh no, the statues are alive! The Stone Zealot boss fight does some pretty serious area damage, but it's really there to show how non-marine infantry are important. If Marauders are taking the hits and medics are healing them, they are no problem. Once we grab the relic, Kerrigan taunts us a little bit and we vominos back to the Hyperion. Even though it was a brief interaction, Jim is obviously rattled hearing from Kerrigan for the first time in years. But there's one thing that everybody seems to agree on.
We've got to stop her, Matt.
The Queen of Blades needs to be eliminated.
Woman like that, there's only one thing to do.
Moping around isn't going to solve anything, so let's check out the final mechanic for the campaign, the laboratory, where we get to meet our boy Egon Stetman and his very adequate science facilities. These are fine, right? I don't know what the doctor was on about. I would work here. Anyway, the lab has some cool stuff. The artifact pieces we've claimed are suspended and contained in the center, and on the side there's some test tubes with a Protoss crystal and Zerg organism. These grow in size as we obtain more Protoss and Zerg bonus objectives throughout the campaign. And finally, we have the research console, where permanent, mutually exclusive upgrades and units can be purchased. Right now, we have enough Zerg research to either get the Shrike turret, a gun on the top of the bunkers, or fortified bunkers, which give them an additional 150 life. One thing that I think is super neat is that the crystal and Zerg organism that grow in the back of the lab, Stetman creates logs for them, documenting his findings as he studies them. And they're always relevant to whatever research you're getting. For example, this first experiment yielded him cells from an Ultralisk, which he used to design the bunker fortification, and cells from a Spore Crawler, which he used to inspire the bunker turret. I really love small stuff like this. It makes the upgrades feel a little bit more connected to the world. I grabbed the Fortified Bunkers upgrade because I find it more generically useful, and with that, we've more or less settled into the post-mission rotation. Whenever we finish a map, we'll go talk to everybody for conversations, check the lab and armory for upgrades, watch the news, and then kick off on another adventure. It's a very similar vibe to the original Dragon Age or Mass Effect trilogy, which unsurprisingly were all in development at the same time. For me, these types of games are the RPG equivalent of comfort food, and I love them. Now that everything on the Hyperion is unlocked, it's time to make some more friends. Let's see what this Tosh guy was asking about. Turns out, he's found a mining operation that was abandoned when the Zerg invaded, and he was interested in starting a little bit of a joint business venture with Raynor in order to claim the bounty of resources on the planet Redstone. And boy, I do love mining minerals, so let's do this. If you were around for the early marketing of StarCraft 2, the Devil's Playground is familiar to you. This is the lava mission, and my goodness, Blizzard was proud of what they did here and wanted everybody to know about it. And to be fair, despite being completely covered in lava, this mission is pretty cool. The Devil's Playground has a few interlocking design elements that would be absolutely awful on their own, but in combination, they cover each other's weaknesses and make a pretty good mission. The objective is to mine 8,000 minerals, which is a lot. To make matters worse, all of the mineral fields are limited and run out quickly. And to make matters even worser, the low ground gets absolutely annihilated by lava every few minutes. It's kinda crazy when the Zerg invasion is like the 4th on the problems list. Obviously, we're gonna have a lot of problems, and we need some pretty strong solutions. And the main one we have here are the gold minerals. If StarCraft was a mobile game, you'd be paying $4.99 for these bad boys. All of Redstone is covered in gold minerals that give 40% more resources per trip, and that adds up quick. Tosh also has some boys coming to help us out. Reapers. They're incredibly fast infantry that can cliff jump, annihilate light targets, and have an anti-building explosive charge. There's a bounty of resources and allies hidden on the many high ground areas around the map, many small groups of light foes to fight as well. And the Reapers don't cost many minerals, but instead a ton of Vespene gas, which makes them perfect for the mission where we want to hold on to as many minerals as possible. When our main base runs out of minerals, we get to use a mechanic that I somehow didn't mention until now. Terran buildings can fly. Well, most of them can. With all of these mechanics, the mission design really starts to coalesce. We float our command centers to the low ground and start mining from the gold mineral fields. The quick Reapers can scout around and defend. Whenever the lava rises, we can lift our command centers, evacuate the SCVs to the high ground, and utilize the Reaper speed and power against buildings to infiltrate and cut through Zerg bases. The mineral light nature of Reapers means that the mineral count keeps going up, and we keep getting closer to our 8,000 goal. The mission also hosts a Brutalisk bonus objective, which I really like. Instead of a bunch of MacGuffins to pick up, we actually get to fight a big Zerg beast. It's a nice change of pace. And one thing I really appreciate is that the lava is symmetrical and fair. If the Zerg, for example maybe this Brutalisk, finds themselves in the lava, they get melted too. And the lava mechanic is perfectly placed here. In any other mission, if you get distracted fighting and forget to lift your command center, you would be absolutely out of luck. But because command centers only cost minerals, and the objective of the mission is to become the Warren Buffett of minerals, as long as you have a single surviving SCV, you're going to be able to rebuild. Everything just works together in such a cohesive package. This is why they were so dang proud of this when the game came out. The design is great. So anyway, they never used any of these mechanics again. There is exactly one gold base in the entire rest of the campaign, bonus points if you know where it is. The lava or any other similar mechanic will never make a reappearance in Wings of Liberty, and the Reaper, whose cliff jumping is a major factor to their power, will basically never see another good cliff to jump again. Though I'm not surprised. The lava mechanic would get real old, real fast, and both Reapers and gold minerals required some pretty big nerfs almost instantly when StarCraft 2 came out. They caused Terran to be absolutely bonkers overpowered at the game's release. Maybe the mission designers were rightly scared of them. And this is slightly off topic, but I don't have anywhere else in the video to talk about this, but thank goodness the lava is symmetrical here. They do reuse the lava mechanic for one co-op mission, but decided to make the enemies immune? It's fun to kill stuff in lava, and I think it should be rewarded. But specific co-op mission design is a little bit outside the scope of this video, so for now, I'm just going to appreciate what a well put together experience the Devil's Playground is. We mine the minerals, hit our quota, and peace out from Redstone. And as we return to the Hyperion, Tosh has invited himself aboard, and everybody is a little bit confused about why he's here. Matt looked into him, and it turns out that Mr. Tosh is a renegade ghost, one of the Dominion's best assassins. But anybody who's turned on the Dominion can't be that bad, right? So the boys decide to let him stay aboard, with a watchful eye. Dr. Hanson then pulls us aside and tells us that these gold minerals that we mined have trace quantities of jorium, a substance that can be used to stimulate brainwaves and maybe produce psionic abilities in people. Honestly impressive that she was able to figure that out in such a shoddy lab. Tosh is obviously up to something, so let's figure out what he's all about. He's got another job for us on the planet Bel Shear, this time liberating some terrazine gas from the Protoss. Once again, we're going to be fighting against the Tal'Darim, but this time, they're serious. Welcome to the Jungle is a mission that is completely overtuned for when you unlock it, and that is 100% intentional. The Protoss have almost every unit unlocked, they get incredible upgrades, and they don't let up the aggression. I get absolutely annihilated. So I do something that is basically impossible in every other RTS campaign ever made. I leave. I slam that abort mission button and jump straight back to the Hyperion. I can come back when I'm better equipped to face off the Protoss threat. In my opinion, this is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle that makes Wings of Liberty stand out among real-time strategy campaigns. The ability to pick your mission order combined with the fact that you can pop back out and change course means that every player is essentially handcrafting their own play order, unique to them. One that works around their skill set, their unlocked units, and their picked upgrades. And that is so freaking cool. On Welcome to the Jungle, we're going to be unlocking the Goliath, and I want to make good use out of it. It's built at the factory, but we currently don't have any other factory units unlocked. So let's return to Dr. Hanson's colonist questline and go unlock the Hellion. The colonists that we evacuated earlier have resettled on the planet Meinhof, but Dr. Hanson is worried that there's some sort of sickness sweeping through the colony. Raynor, who's more familiar with the Zerg, identifies the problem instantly.
I've seen this kind of thing before. It's a Zerg virus. All we can do is burn it out.
The colony and colonists have been infected by the swarm and need to be cleansed, so the raiders suit up and prepare for action. Outbreak is the traditional tropey zombie infestation story. Legions of the Walking Dead, or in this case infested, smash against the walls of bunkers during the night, but the Zerg virus makes them vulnerable to sunlight, so they burn away during the day. From a lore perspective, the Zerg are infamous for infesting all living creatures, including Terran, their leader Kerrigan being the best example. But the swarm hasn't figured out what exactly to do with normal humans yet. Kerrigan was handcrafted, so I don't exactly hate the idea that the current Zergified humans are just kinda bad. I mean, look at us, they probably infested gamers. It's good and all that we're here to try to protect the colonists, but Tychus isn't convinced that this is all worth it. He thinks that Dr. Hanson and Jim might have a thing for each other, and this is not the first time that he said so. That also just doesn't matter at all right now, file it away somewhere for later. After bunkering up and holding off the waves of infested, it becomes very clear that this mission is not messing around. The early attacks are pretty fierce and can easily break through unrepaired bunkers, but firebats in the bunkers are pretty darn good at holding things off. Eventually, we're delivered our new unit. Chief Engineer Swan has nicked the plans for those Hellions we saw back on the second mission, finally giving us access to the flamethrowing cars that we were teased long ago. It's also the first unit built out of our advanced production facility, the factory. As the sun begins to rise, the attacking infested are cleansed, and we get our turn to strike. And learn that the Hellions aren't actually very good here. We need to destroy a lot of buildings, and while Hellions do bonus damage against them, their DPS is still not very high. This is one of the things that's just very difficult to design around when making an RTS. The Hellion is a harassment unit. It's designed for multiplayer, specifically on containing Zerg early on and then diving into mineral lines to roast workers. But in the campaign, the enemy can almost never be contained and never uses resources like we do. This creates an awkward spot where the unit is incredibly important to be part of the Terran arsenal for the entire game, but doesn't have a great role in the campaign. They are cheap though, so making them is not some major loss. But I actually have a pet theory that explains the Hellions' relative mildness on this mission even better. Remember how I said that fire bats were good on this mission? Well, that was an understatement. This is the best they will ever be by far. Meanwhile, the car with a flamethrower really could have used a long path it had to scoot around and defend attacks on. Maybe one with a road. I think that in the early development of StarCraft 2, they built the first colonist mission, Evacuation, with Hellions as the intended unlock unit. And they built this mission with firebats in mind. But then sometime down the road, they switched the units because they wanted infantry to unlock first and vehicles later. Unfortunately, I will never know if my theory is true because I've wanted to talk to the lead designer Dustin Browder about unit and mission design for a really long time now, but I'm socially anxious, so I wrote an email to him like 8 months ago, but I haven't sent it because I'm too shy. So I'm just gonna pretend I'm right. Anyway, this mission's bonus objective is very nice. There are 2 Zerg Infestor units that each give a research point when killed. They're burrowed during the day and active during the night. I like how you can approach this one from multiple different ways. You can YOLO into it while the Infested are swarming. You can clear the area around it and then wait for it to pop up at night. Or, during the day, when it's safe, you can utilize detector units and structures like the missile turret to reveal it. The objective rewards player creativity and also gives a little hint about where the infestation came from. You defend against the hordes of infested until the night ends, and then it's time for suns out, guns out to clear. Progress feels very tangible as the map opens up, but the remaining infested get stronger, eventually sending ranged marines, and later the towering aberration, which is my favorite variant on the infested Terran. I mean, just look at how weird he looks. Once the mission is completely cleared, the colonists pack up and leave once again. A second attempt at finding a new home, and very quickly they find one. A world named Haven near Protoss space. But Matt Horner has some concerns about the remaining civilians being infested, but the doctor snaps back.
Aren't either of you worried the colonists might be infested?
How could you even suggest that? They're perfectly healthy.
Jim's concerned too. The Protoss do not mess around regarding infestation. Hopefully, when they show up, he can talk them down. And with that build-up, we go to... where's Haven? Welcome to a very weird little snag about how StarCraft 2 was designed. The game doesn't have the ability to predict where you're gonna go next, so it feels like a conversation that would launch straight into the Haven mission instead happens after Outbreak, and then we need to do 2 other missions before Haven unlocks. Now, it does feel more natural, giving the colonists a bit of time to settle down, but it also means it's pretty easy to forget this conversation. I don't see a great answer to this issue. Blizzard clearly had to make a decision about tighter storytelling versus player freedom in mission order and decided that the freedom was more important, and honestly, I agree. So, while we wait for the colonists to settle down at their new home, let's go rob some trains. Matt's got some intel that the Dominion has been running a large salvage operation on Tarsonis, the ruins of the former Confederate capital. And it looks like they've found something particularly valuable. And that's good enough incentive for us to steal it. Loading into the Great Train Robbery, we have, in theory, a mission that has been played out 1,000,000 times in older RTS. An objective spawns on one side of the map and tries to cross it. We have to kill it before it finishes. Repeat 8 times and we're done. But this mission is a fantastic example of how Wings of Liberty goes above and beyond to keep repetitive objectives fresh and interesting throughout a mission. As soon as we load in, we find an old abandoned Diamondback, a hover tank with an anti-armor railgun that can fire while moving. These are the key to keeping up with the trains long enough to blast them. There's a few of them to be rescued around the map, and we can make more at the factory. When the first train arrives, it's far more durable than anything we have ever dealt with in the campaign so far, but undefended. With the Diamondbacks, we can take it down eventually, and when it's destroyed, it drops a trove of resources. Which we need, because this being the former Terran capital means that Tarsonis is very low on natural resources to harvest. The Orcs would be proud because we're real raiders today. Besides that, basically everything is the same as it always is. There are some bonuses to find, Diamondbacks to rescue, and trains to rob. The Diamondbacks are fast and give complete control of the map, allowing us to zip around and never be caught out of position. From the second train onwards, there are stronger escorts for each train, and the final one is very well protected. And in most games, that would be the mission. It would be fine. But instead, the Great Train Robbery has a series of very deliberate events that take what would be an otherwise mundane, repetitive mission and add a lot of spice. There are 2 separate angles that the mission uses to squeeze the player: containment and the skies. After the second train, we're hit with an attack at our base. The enemies aren't much, but it does include the medevac, which is a flying healer, and our diamondbacks cannot hit air. But the healing medevac cannot fight back either. After the third train, the Dominion begins constructing multiple bunkers around the map. The Diamondbacks can start to knock them down, but once they're fully loaded with infantry inside, they can deal big damage and slow us down as we pass, limiting our movement. The fourth escort includes a Raven, a flying spellcaster that can use slowly regenerating energy to create turrets or fire missiles. Once again, the Diamondbacks can't attack this flyer, but it can only do limited amounts of damage before running out of energy. From now on, most of the trains are going to have a Raven escort that you either need to kill or avoid the spells of. After the fifth train, the Dominion kill teams arrive, and groups of marauders and medics roam around the map with a warning icon. You can either attack them and lose a lot of forces when you try, or avoid them for the entire mission. And now that the map is lined with bunkers and kill teams that are patrolling around, the game switches it up. Mobility is limited, so they start throwing super fast trains down the tracks. If you're not careful, you can either run into a kill team or get nabbed by a concussive shell marauder in a bunker and the train will pass. And then between the two speed trains comes the first Banshee. An attack wave brings the anti-ground helicopter unit to your base, forcing a consistent anti-air answer to be provided. And then finally comes the death wave. The final train is slow again, but escorted by multiple Ravens, multiple Banshees, and a lot of ground units that require good damage to kill. You need to bring anti-air for the flyers, look out for the bunkers and the kill teams patrolling, and have retained a strong enough army to punch through the remaining defenders. All while barely mining because the mission is low on natural resources. Getting peeled apart by the constraint and the air units is a death sentence. This mission's design is just great. The Diamondback feels absolutely overpowered in the early stages when it has free reign to do whatever it wants, but as things progress, its weaknesses are slowly highlighted. Mobility means nothing if you let yourself be contained, and cracking armored targets on the ground is nice, but not if you're dying to air. The slowly ramping but different challenges not only gives variety and teaches the player about the unit's weakness, but also guides them to countering those weaknesses, which means they aren't blindsided by the challenge of the final fight. I've played a lot of older RTS games that would have the escorts essentially be identical every time, maybe just increasing the unit count, and then the big final wave would hit you with a mix-up from out of nowhere and you just wouldn't have the tools and it would take a full restart to win. The Great Train Robbery, on the other hand, is clever, multifaceted, and subtle. The Diamondback remains the hero unit, but you feel naturally inclined to build those supporting units, and then it pays off. So now that we've taken down all the trains, what was in them that the Dominion was so excited about? An adjutant. Adjutants are the robot announcers that yell at me for not having enough minerals, Vespene gas, or supply when I mess up while playing.
Add-on complete. Additional supply depot. Insufficient Vespene gas. Auxiliary Vespene geyser exhausted.
And they're also supercomputers that serve as the advisory role to commanders. And this one is locked down tight, identifying Jim quite properly as a criminal. If we want to know what's on it, we're going to have to make some calls. The man for the job is Colonel Orlin at Dead Man's Port, a hive of scum and villainy. So we pack up the adjutant and send it off to get decrypted. But Orlin isn't the only person at Dead Man's Port that the raiders know. It turns out that the straight-laced second-in-command Matt Horner is married. And his wife is quite something.
Oh, and say hello to Matthew for me. Ask him why he never calls.
Matt won Mirahan's hand in marriage in a poker game where he didn't know what he was playing for. And because Mira likes us so much, she fills us in on some of the details about what's going down. It turns out that Orlin decrypted the adjutant pretty quick, and he found something pretty juicy, so he's trying to sell it back to the Dominion. But he knew we would inevitably find out about this, so he hired Mira's marauders as protection. Mira, being the kind soul that she is, gives us the same deal that she gave him. Whoever can pay her 6,000 minerals first gets the help. Isn't true love beautiful? Cutthroat is an interesting rehash of a few mechanics we've seen before. Once again, we're collecting thousands of minerals, but this time there's no lava, instead we're racing. To win the race, the map is absolutely covered in scrap that can be collected for minerals, and to do that, we have an old classic.
Damn, Jimmy. Are those vulture bikes?
The Vulture is a classic StarCraft 1 unit, and unlike the Firebat, it is good. It's a fast, mine-laying hit-and-run bike that crushes light units and is both cheap and quick to produce. They each come equipped with 3 Spire Mines that can be laid down to defend areas. There's a joke in StarCraft 1 that you're really paying for the mines and the bike comes free, and that is absolutely true here too. To support the Vultures, I need a mobile unit that can push through armor, so Diamondbacks are the natural choice. As I knock down some of Orlan's bases and loot the map for cash, let's talk a little bit about this Diamondback. There are a few units in the campaign that do not appear in StarCraft 1 and are also absent from StarCraft 2 multiplayer. The Diamondback is one of the best examples of this, but it also wasn't always the case. In the first gameplay reveal for StarCraft 2 Terran, there was a unit called the Cobra, which looks awfully familiar. They show it nimbly strafing around this big bulky Thor as they blast it. The Diamondback was absolutely, at one point, intended as a multiplayer unit, but eventually it was deemed too overlapping and roll with the siege tank, who we're gonna see soon. This is one of the really cool things about having a well-developed and invested in campaign. The multiplayer factions for StarCraft 2 were intentionally designed to be small in scope. Wings of Liberty, Terran, and Protoss only had 12 combat units, and Zerg only had 11 unless you count the Broodling. But for the campaign, Terran had 22. Being able to design anything you find mildly interesting gives a ton of creative freedom to just try stuff, see what works. Make a giant faction with lots of different tools, and then once everything is implemented, you can slim it down for multiplayer. Try various combos and see what works best. This approach worked exceptionally well. In fact, I think it was a major contributor to why Terran was so oppressive in the first year of StarCraft. The faction was just more feature complete than Protoss or Zerg at the time, and I think that's largely due to being sculpted from a much larger block of units. I'm still upset that this alpha video's version of battlecruisers never made it into the game though. Look at these plasma torpedoes. Even in 720p, they are absolutely glorious and something that should have been playable. It is so cool. Once we have our 6,000 minerals, Mira joins our side, and Jim complains that she's ripping us off. And then we proceed to get reinforced with 10,400 resources worth of units and structures. I don't know where Jim went to middle school where he thinks that 6,000 is more than 10,000, but the man might need to retake a few math courses because hiring Mira Han is an absolute steal. As a side note, unfortunately this mission doesn't do anything if Orlan reaches 6,000 minerals before you, it just gives you a game over screen. I would have loved to see it become a hard mode and turn into a 2v1 instead, but it wasn't meant to be. What was meant to be was the Doom push. With the massive army we now have, we can attack Orlan and get our adjutant back. This man is fortified on multiple layers of high ground and serves as another mini teaser to Terran units and abilities we haven't seen yet, including ghosts, nukes, and a battlecruiser mercenary. The base hits the sweet spot in terms of difficulty. It isn't impossible to break, but does serve as a challenge that asks for quite a big army. But one thing I really like about the mission is that you don't actually need to get Mira's help. As I said, if Orlan reaches 6,000 minerals, you do lose, but if you're clever, you can kill Orlan's planetary fortress and force a surrender long before being conned into Mira's horrible deal. So what was so important on this adjutant that it was worth so much to the Dominion? During the events of StarCraft 1, Kerrigan and Jim were working with Arcturus Mengsk to fight against the Confederacy. To defeat the Confederates, Mengsk used a device called a psi emitter to lure Zerg to the Terran capital of Tarsonis and overwhelm it, abandoning Lieutenant Kerrigan to the Zerg in the process. From the ashes, Mengsk founded the Dominion of Man and crowned himself the Emperor. And this adjutant has recorded proof of all of it. It's around this time that Emperor Mengsk is going to start appearing more and more on the news segments between every mission. Now that we have evidence against the Emperor, a confrontation seems inevitable. But Mengsk isn't the only one we need to get revenge against, because I got my butt handed to me by some Tal'Darim on Belshir earlier. Now I have a diverse selection of factory units unlocked, so it's my turn to kick Protoss. But wait, do they have butts? Probably not. I've never seen one sit. No, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of Protoss biology. Wait, they have 2 sets of knees? Okay, we're not kicking their non-existent butts, but we are breaking their kneecaps. Settled. To recap from before, Mr. Tosh had another job for us. This time, liberating some Terrazine gas from the Tal'Darim. The gas is sacred to them, which is why they're so absolutely overwhelming when trying to defend it. We get the Goliath, a walker made from the factory with an anti-ground gun and anti-air missiles. It's another StarCraft 1 unit, and this time, it's alright. It hits air, and we kinda need that because the Protoss rule the skies, so we'll make them. So what is it that makes Welcome to the Jungle so freaking hard? Really, it's everything. I talked earlier about how the Protoss have basically every tech unit unlocked, which is already pretty difficult. But the objective and map design also play into it. There are 13 Terrazine altars scattered around the map, and we need to extract from 7 of them. When we try to do so, the Tal'Darim Protoss will come to stop us. The Protoss will also try to seal off the geysers, making them unextractable. If they manage to seal 7 of them, we lose. And they like to attack our bases with pretty scary forces. But most importantly, these waves to stop our extraction, sealing the altars, and attacking our bases are all independent of each other and have no problem happening simultaneously. To compound on that, the map is big and open. The Protoss get to move around easily and can pull you apart, while we have to clear through many outposts to have that same freedom. The mission demands slow and steady progress, taking a second base and building a massive army. I opt to use spider mines from my vultures to soften the enemy up, diamondbacks to crack Protoss armor, and Goliaths to fight off the flyers. You can't get away with a lopsided composition here. You need to cover all your bases, figuratively and literally. Eventually, I gather 4 Terrazine and clear all the outposts on the map. All that remains are the altars to extract and an absolutely titanic Protoss base to the north. A lot of StarCraft 2 missions have enormous bases like this, and they are meant to be avoided. They serve as staging points for the enemy, building attacks and segmenting off parts of the map. It feels much better when the enemy actually has to make stuff instead of just spawning things in. So this titanic uber death base who is not part of the objective at all, we're gonna kill it. We're doing it for glory, honor, and most importantly, an achievement. StarCraft 2 has a really robust achievement system, and it deserves praise. Each mission has a variety of achievements that range from simply playing the game well and doing all the objectives to doing some weird stuff like killing the Brutalisk on Redstone with the lava. And occasionally in Wings of Liberty, there are these special feats of strength, hidden achievements for doing outlandishly difficult things like breaching this monster base. I originally wasn't going to bring this topic up, but modern RTSs have frankly had laughable achievements. Age of Empires 4, Company of Heroes 3, and Age of Mythology Retold achievements are really, really boring. And yeah, I'm specifically calling them out to do better. When you make things that are interesting and weird, it becomes a blast to hunt for the achievements. It adds replay value for minimum effort. If it wasn't for this achievement, I'd never be fighting this crazy base. And despite having an incredible, well-upgraded army, this fight takes me multiple minutes to finish. The Protoss production goes overdrive to try to push me out. I have to take good angles, stay spread out against area damage, and focus fire production to take the enemy down. And really politely, the mission even ends automatically when every Protoss building is destroyed. So we're just going to ignore the fact that I was so excited to fight the big base that I accidentally forgot the final bonus objective and have to awkwardly reload the mission, grab it, and then win the normal way. Way to kill the momentum, Grant. You almost looked cool for a moment. Now that we have the Goliath, it's as good as time as any to go into a bit more depth about the armory upgrade system. As we talked about before, after every mission we get credits, which can be spent to get a variety of permanent upgrades for our units. In most RTS, these upgrades would be something that you get in-game. If you want your StarCraft 1 Marines to have +1 range, you need to build an academy, spend 150 minerals, 150 gas, and wait 100 seconds for the upgrade to finish. The Hyperion armory system means that you don't have to repeat this process 30 times over the campaign, which is very welcome. But some units, like the Goliath, are absolute dog water without their armory upgrades. The base Goliath is expensive, does moderate at best damage, and has low range. But one of the upgrades gives it slightly increased anti-ground range and 50% more anti-air range, and the other lets it attack ground and air simultaneously. It feels a bit bad knowing that if you want to use this unit effectively down the line, you gotta pay for the upgrades. The other issue are niche upgrades. I grabbed health on my Diamondbacks because being durable and moving while shooting makes them pretty good at charging into defenses, but they also have a range upgrade, and I only really care about that when I'm fighting against other Terran opponents. In other strategy games, I could just grab the upgrade when I needed it and don't get it when I don't. But here, it's binary. Overall, I think that the armory system is very good. I would like to see it back in more games, but if we do, I think that a hybrid system would be best. Use the Hyperion armory to start missions with upgrades, and then when in the mission, you can upgrade the things that you didn't start with. Thanks to Orca Warrior for helping me whip up this mock-up of the concept. Another change I came up with a while back is whenever you unlock a new unit on a mission, doing the mission's bonus objectives gives you that unit's armory upgrades for that mission only. This was one of the first things I wrote down when designing Nightmare difficulty for StarCraft 2, and it has proven very popular. Not only does it allow you to sample the upgrades before buying, but it incentivizes not leaving the bonuses until the very end, and then forgetting them. With my Goliath upgrades online, I think it's time to finally finish off the Colonist questline. But before that, we have to talk a bit about Dr. Ariel Hanson. The Doctor is an interesting character. She's fairly immature at times, and obviously believes herself to be an incredible scientist, but also comes across as somebody that is compassionate and caring. In the random side conversations with Jim, whenever he's talking about things like Kerrigan or Manx, you can tell that she's both empathetic and kind.
That's just monstrous. No wonder you hate him so much.
When it comes to the colonists, you can tell that she feels incredibly protective of them, to the point that it blinds her. And right now, we're about to see the results of that. As the Hyperion reaches Haven, they find a Protoss fleet holding above the planet. These are not the fanatic Tal'Darim, but the Daylon that Jim has fought side by side with against the Zerg. As the Protoss Executor opens comms, we learn what's going on.
Our observers detected Zerg hive spores infesting the colonists. They must be purified. If you wish to undertake this mission in our stead, we will permit it.
Jim, some of my people are infested. But you can't let the Protoss just destroy them all. If you keep the Protoss at bay, I know I can find a cure for the infestation.
The only cure for Zerg infestation is purification by fire. You know this to be true, James Raynor. The choice is yours, James Raynor. We await your answer.
This is the first of the 3 split choice missions in Wings of Liberty, and it is not a superficial choice. What we do here will result in a completely different mission being played out, with different consequences to the story. For the sake of this playthrough, I will reload a save and do both sides, but I genuinely agree with the Protoss Executor. They know the Zerg better than anyone. So we suit up, Hanson storms off, and the Raiders prepare to purge the colony of Haven. As we make planetfall, things are bad. Zerg virophages are spreading the infestation to the colonists, and they're well defended. To fight for the skies, we get the Viking, our first flyer. These can swap between an anti-aircraft fighter jet and an anti-ground walker. The fighter jet mode has fantastic range and anti-armor capability, while the walker is decent but nothing to write home about. While they are enough to punch through the first infestation site on their own, Vikings are not a unit that you want to solo the entire mission with. Haven's Fall is all about infestation. There are 3 primary Zerg hive clusters around the map, each defended by a strong base. And then there are 6 towns of colonists scattered around. Over time, the Zerg will infest these towns, causing a steady trickle of infested to spawn and attack us. To fight off the variety of Zerg and infested, we need a decent ground force with Vikings above to screen for the flyers. This means there are quite a few things you need to juggle here. Defending against the infested and Zerg attacks, clearing out the already infested areas, rapidly engaging the infestation attempts to prevent things from getting overwhelming, and trying to figure out where and when to take some time to attack the primary Zerg bases. The diverse group of enemies means you need to field a variety of units that complement each other. I go for bulky infantry with medic support, Goliaths in the back, and Vikings up top. Haven's Fall is a good mid-game checkpoint of a mission. We're no longer at the point where you can just spam the new unit to win. Instead, it tests your ability to fold it into the rest of the Terran arsenal. The mission tests your defense, attack, and time management skills, and the grind is long. You'll run out of minerals at your main base. So it tests your economic management and ability to defend multiple areas as well. As we're fighting against the former colonists, Matt gives us an update. Dr. Hanson has locked herself into the lab. She's desperate. The mission captures the vibe of cleansing infestation very well with how slow and methodical it encourages you to be. But once the infestations have been completely cleared, it becomes obvious that not everything is solved. In a desperate attempt to save her people, Ariel Hanson made a mistake. She's been infested. The resulting fight isn't close, it's not epic, or cool, or fun. It's Jim Raynor putting someone down who's already dead. The story of Ariel Hanson is a cautionary tale. The Zerg are not something that can be ignored, cannot be underestimated, and cannot be cured. They will take and consume and destroy until there's nothing left, or until Kerrigan is dead. In the cantina, Tosh explains how everything we fought for wasn't for naught. Hanson and her colonists were a trap set up by the Zerg with the intent of causing a refugee crisis, infesting the colonists, and then having an infested outbreak on the core worlds when they arrive. They were a bomb that was always going to go off. But because of the Raiders, that bomb exploded in a barren corner of space instead of in the most populated Terran planets. This is good writing. Genuinely good writing. Hanson is written as a complex character, one with pure motivations but naivety that eventually led to her demise. Her passing and the tragedy of Haven make the stakes real. It's no longer abstract. We understand exactly what will happen if the swarm is not stopped. When I played this mission for the first time, I genuinely thought it was some of the best and most real character writing that Blizzard has ever done. So let's ruin all of that. Because there is a second option. It is time for the absolute pile of nonsense that is Safe Haven. We side with the Doctor against our Protoss comrades who just a few years earlier we were entrusting the entire fate of the galaxy to. So it's time to engage them in honorable combat. So begins Safe Haven, a mission with an absolutely incredible premise and some of the worst execution in the franchise. The Protoss have brought one of their strongest weapons to cleanse Haven, a Purifier mothership. This behemoth of a capital ship will move from colony to colony, obliterating them. To make things worse, the mothership is immune to all damage. Its shields are being reinforced by 3 nexus that the Protoss have constructed on the map. If we want to save the colony, we have to destroy these nexus and then fight the mothership itself. Once again, we're given the Viking, but unlike Haven's Fall, we're not tested at all. This mission does some really cool stuff. For example, instead of pylons powering the enemy defenses, there are Protoss warp prisms, flying units that do the same job as the pylon when deployed. The Vikings' anti-air rockets knock them down. There are also many high-tech Protoss units, like the Colossus, a towering siege unit that's so tall that it can be attacked by anti-air despite being a ground unit. The Vikings' anti-air rockets knock them down. Once the Purifier mothership reaches a colony, it'll fire an intense purification laser to annihilate it, and then send a terror fleet of advanced ships to the next colony. The Vikings' anti-air rockets knock them down. 95% of this entire map's threats are eliminated by Vikings, and the final 5% is the Nexus at the bottom left. It does have some legitimate defenders, but when you've countered everything else in the mission so hard by spamming the unit that you're given, the Viking force is so large and untouchable that they blast through easily, which leaves the Purifier mothership itself. Perhaps the single worst boss fight of any major RTS. Imagine this. You wake up in 2008 with an email. You've been accepted to work at the famous Blizzard Entertainment, making the most anticipated strategy game of the decade. Your first job, design a boss fight. Your boss follows a set path, and the enemy gets a lot of units with 9 range and are encouraged to use them. So what's the first thing that you do? If your answer is make sure that the boss also has at least 9 range so it can fight back, you would be fired. The Purifier mothership just cannot attack you. It has an attack, it's actually a pretty good attack if you somehow manage to get hit by it, but you never will because you outrange the thing. The mothership even does some fancy things like pull you into a black hole and warp in reinforcements, but the strategy is literally click on it. I did nothing, literally hands off the keyboard, and it wasn't even close. This isn't the shoddily put together army of a mercenary, it isn't a niche Protoss cult working with what they can get. This is a mothership of the Golden Armada, and it is a joke. After the mission, Selendis is defeated and retreats, and we get this cheesy cinematic where Dr. Hanson leaves the Hyperion crew to stay at Haven, asks Jim to come with her, presumably with a promise of better lab equipment, and kisses him. There are so many better ways this could have been handled. Maybe a time defense mission where you need to hold out until Dr. Hanson finishes the cure, and you don't win by overpowering the Protoss, but instead convincing them to stop fighting because you got the cure. None of this victory feels earned. We're facing off against the most technologically advanced fleet in the galaxy, and it felt like a joke. Wait, back up a moment. Holding out to get a cure? Where the heck are the infested colonists during this mission? The colonists were infested, right? The Zerg hive clusters were established in the alternate timeline. It was a deep-seated problem. And they're just nowhere to be seen here. Isn't the Protoss and Terran fighting against each other exactly what the Zerg would want in this scenario? Yeah, it is. So the game just never brings it up. In fact, at no point in this entire thing does any character ever actually say that Hanson found a cure to the infestation. Before the mission, she was claiming she could, and after we fight the Protoss, she just kisses us and leaves. I had to watch through all the dialogue twice to make sure of this. The whole thing got so confusing that I had to DM StarCraft's lore master Subsorian asking for help, and thank goodness that man is a walking encyclopedia, because there is apparently exactly one place in the entire game that confirms that she cured the Zerg hyper-evolutionary virus. If you finish the mission, and then quit out of the campaign, and then go to the screen to resume playing, you get a short blurb about your last mission, and that blurb confirms that she did it. You literally have to stop playing the game to get this incredibly important piece of story. Apparently this quote-unquote cure has caused a lot of contention in the lore community. Either Hanson is sitting here keeping a cure to the Zerg virus for herself, and billions are dying because she's too selfish to share, or the cure doesn't actually work and Haven is doomed the moment we leave. None of these things are addressed. As far as I'm concerned, this is the literal moment that Blizzard shifted from their darker, grittier storytelling of the 90s and 2000s to the happy ever after fairy tale storytelling they have now. And it is a darn shame. Fortunately, this is the lowest of the low as far as StarCraft goes. Oh wait, one more thing. This voice line after the mission pisses me off so much. Jim goes to the armory and talks to Swan, and being the chief engineer, he's like, whoo, what a nice Protoss ship, all cool and powerful. That's not what he sounds like at all, doesn't matter. And then Jim is like, I'd be more impressed if they used all that power against the Zerg. Like, my brother, what do you think they were there for? They came to the colony because it was infested. Nothing makes sense. The characters don't say anything of value. They forget about the cure. No one talks about it. And they don't know why the Protoss were fighting. What did we just do? Okay, I can't do any more of this. We need to move on. Let's dig ourselves out of this bottomless lore pit. We've loaded back into the Haven's Fall continuity. The story is good again, and we're ready to rock. Tychus has a lead on a third artifact. Turns out the Mobius Corps tried to get this one themselves, but contact with their team went silent. So it's up to us to investigate. Quickly, we find that the Tal'Darim were once again guarding the artifact. Bit of a pattern is emerging here. But given we know these guys are not messing around, we unlock our first piece of heavy ordnance and perhaps the most iconic Terran unit, the Siege Tank. These bad boys have a fairly mediocre mobile mode and the ability to set up into an absolutely devastating artillery form with massive range and huge damage in an area. Once we find the former Mobius base, it's time to use that firepower to our advantage. In my opinion, the Dig is one of the better defense missions in StarCraft, and I think StarCraft has some of the better defense missions in general, so that's high praise. The objective is to protect a giant laser drill as it cuts through the temple door. Waves of very strong Protoss will come to stop us. This mission is 100% designed around forcing the player to understand how freaking good defensive siege tanks are. I talked earlier about how Terran use an anchor and chain style of play, with strong immobile fortifications that are supported by mobility. The advent of the siege tank is what really makes that playstyle shine. The ability to drag your anchor from place to place gives a lot of tactical flexibility, and the fact that when you're in tank mode you're fairly vulnerable means that it rewards methodical and thoughtful play. But with good anchors comes the second aspect of Terran play, big turtle energy. And that is exactly what we're expected to do here. The Dig is a turning point in Wings of Liberty, where most missions from here on out are going to make the assumption that we have access to this incredible defensive tool and modulate their attack power accordingly. Or in simple English, from now on the enemies are going to hit much harder and much faster than before. Eventually the Protoss start sending advanced tech units against us, more than we can reasonably deal with at this point in the mission. So we're given manual control of that big old laser drill to shoot down the enemies, and vision so we can see where the Protoss gather. This combination is what makes the Dig really shine as a defense mission. In a lot of other games, and even the Zerg expansion of this one, I find defense missions rather drab, particularly on higher difficulties. They often become elongated slogs where you struggle to get defenses up, and then it's just a process of defeating the same attack waves over and over until the timer hits 0. So why is the dig any different? I think the drill and the vision are really what do it. You have a lot of different options for how you want to build your anchor here. Bunkers and infantry, planetary fortresses if you feel like it, spider mines, siege tanks, and even air-to-ground flyers if you took a different tech direction than I did. The enemy sends a big mix of different units against you, and what's threatening is based on how you're playing. Each attack is now something you want to look over, decide what's important for your strategy to destroy, and then weigh if it's worth taking the drill off of the objective to take that out. Because when the drill's not attacking the door, it means the mission's going to take longer. For example, I'm not using exposed biological units, so the Protoss Archons are not a big threat to me, but I did have to target down the anti-armor immortals early on. And because I wasn't building those early infantry, I was skimping a bit on anti-air, and the early air waves needed the full drill attention to deal with. But it is totally valid to play this mission with Marines and medics as a blob in front of your tanks, targeting down the Archons instead, and then laughing at the immortals as they tickle your infantry. Contrast this to a defense mission I played fairly recently, Mission 30 of Age of Mythology on Titan difficulty. This is a very similar mission in a lot of ways. You find an abandoned mining base, build up a ton of defenses, and hold on for dear life against overwhelming odds. But on that mission, the lack of vision means that proactive decision making is basically impossible. I usually love Age of Mythology, but on Titan difficulty, I sort of felt railroaded here. I had to make a very generic mix of ranged units to sit behind my walls and absorb every blow because without knowledge of what was coming, there just wasn't any room to strategize or customize based on the threats. The Age of Mythology mission actually sent a larger variety of enemies against me, but it felt more repetitive than the dig. It didn't really matter what they sent because I had to counter it with the same stuff no matter what. There are a couple other things that make StarCraft defense missions excel that I think could be learned from. And maybe the most important one are the maps. Blizzard just gives you an awesome fortress to defend from every time. You get high ground, you get cliffs, you get choke points, everything you could ask for. If they want to make the mission harder, they add more threats, make the attack waves hit from multiple angles, make the enemy tech stronger. I really dislike it when a game wants you to defend an area and then they give you some obvious giant weakness that feels super contrived. Like it's just there to make your life annoying. StarCraft in general avoids this, and it makes things a lot more fun. The other thing that makes Terran defense missions specifically just the best is auto repair. SCVs, when left to their own devices, will zip around and patch up your stuff. It costs a bit of money, but anything mechanical can be repaired, even the drill that you have to protect. The constant repairing and damaging dynamic makes fights significantly more tense and removes frustrating scenarios like random pot shots against the drill being unrecoverable. And the final thing that rocks about Terran defense, particularly once you have a decent amount of tech, is that it just looks and feels right. I mean, look at this. I don't need to explain it. The Zerg might be able to invade multiple planets simultaneously, the Protoss field the strongest robotics, starships, and psionics in the galaxy, but Terran can pick an area and say, "This is mine." Us Terran might be at the mercy of others in a full-scale war, but dang it, we have centuries of experience digging in and letting the artillery shells fly, and sometimes that is enough. So, thanks for coming to my TED Talk about why I don't like most time defense missions, but the Terran ones, particularly in the mid to late game of Wings of Liberty, are pretty darn good. Oh, and there are some bonus objectives you gotta use the drill to get out, that's cool too, I guess. After drilling through the temple, we get the artifact, and Jim starts wondering why all these artifacts seem so popular with the Protoss and Zerg. But the artifacts aren't the only thing that's popular, because Jim is about to get a very spooky visit from a very old friend. The Protoss Zeratul, who he fought beside in StarCraft 1, appears, and he dramatically hands Raynor a crystal. The thing with all the lights going off is like completely over the top, but honestly, Zeratul has always had a flair for drama in the first game, so it fits.
I have beheld the births of negative sounds, and borne witness to the entropy of entire realities.
Zeratul also comes with a warning. If we kill Kerrigan, it will be the doom of us all. And the Ehon crystal that he's given Jim will allow him to experience Zeratul's memory to understand why. And then he vanishes. Because Zeratul was absolutely a theater kid. Now that we have the Ehon crystal stationed in the lab, we are allowed to play a series of 4 Protoss missions from Zeratul perspective, which is a nice change of pace from being Terran all the time. We also have a follow-up mission from that decrypted adjutant. Mira Han has kindly given her betrothed a tip about an experimental Dominion weapon named the Odin. Also, the Mobius Foundation that wants these artifacts reached out for help. Their main research campus is under attack by the Zerg. If we want to sell them the artifacts, we gotta go rescue them. And Tosh has another mission for us. He wants to stage a jailbreak on the maximum security prison New Folsom that holds many that have risen up against the Dominion over the years. And that mission is going to turn out to be a split mission, meaning that currently we have 5 places we can go right now. I know that I've hammered a lot about the insane level of choice that's available to the player in Wings of Liberty in terms of progression, and this is going to be the last time I talk about it, I promise. But it is truly astonishing how much player customization there is here. Once we get to the Hyperion, there are 5 separate storylines that can be progressed through in whatever order before reaching Char. Each mission has varied unlock requirements, always requiring the mission before it in the storyline to be beaten, and then sometimes waiting for a bit, sometimes requiring a certain number of missions to be beaten in total, and sometimes it's just available immediately. And to get to the end game where we assault Char, you don't actually have to do everything if you don't want to. We have to gather all the artifacts and then only beat 16 out of the 25 missions. But of course, you can go all the way to doing 25. So I got a bit curious, how many different ways are there to actually play through Wings of Liberty? Unfortunately, the unlock order is far too complex to toss into a math equation, but we live in the era of computer science, so we can simulate it. Well, my friend Ace can. After some debugging, we eventually had a program that could properly simulate every legal mission order in Wings of Liberty. So we let it start counting. And after a little bit more debugging and letting the program run overnight, we got an answer. So let's play a game. It's more fun if you actually take a guess at how many possible permutations there are. For perspective, the Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void expansions are a bit more limited in how many missions can be done. But Swarm has 8 different routes you can take, and Void has 16. So take a guess how many different ways you can play through Wings of Liberty. Alright, are you ready? 10,469,415,152. When I said you can make Wings of Liberty personal, make it your own run, I was not exaggerating in the slightest. There is a very real chance that your playthrough was special and unique to you. There will be billions of valid routes that no human in history will ever play. All because Blizzard decided to give players choice and trusted them to use that choice to find their own fun. That is beautiful, and I want to see more of it. Anyway, this is way too much rambling by me, so instead let's go listen to Zeratul ramble a bit. It's time to play some Protoss. Upon starting Whispers of Doom, we get our first pre-rendered cutscene since the beginning of the campaign. Blizzard has always been famous for their cinematic quality, and this is no exception. There isn't actually a whole lot to say about it because cinematics are mostly about the cool fight scenes, but we'll talk about it anyway. We see Zeratul searching a Xel'Naga ruin for information about a prophecy until he runs into the swarm. After dispatching multiple Hydralisks with his signature dramatic style, Kerrigan herself appears, telling him that something greater is coming, a force that cannot be stopped. The two skirmish for a bit, and the Dark Templar lands a blow on the Queen of Blades, only for her to regenerate as if it were nothing, and Zeratul retreats. For modern standards, the cinematic is a little bit slow-paced, but overall, it still looks and sounds great. You'll love to see it. Getting into the mission itself, we're now playing as Zeratul. The goal is to reach 3 more Xel'Naga shrines and get more information about the upcoming threat. Being a Dark Templar, Zeratul is permanently cloaked. Cloaking is a pretty typical invisibility mechanic that we'll see more of as we get into the later stages of the campaign. Cloaked units are invisible and untargetable by the opponent. They can't be attacked directly, but are vulnerable to area damage. There are various units in the game with the detector attribute, represented by the white circle. If you walk too close to a detector, the enemy can see and attack you as normal. At first, Whispers of Doom looks and feels like a stealth mission. Zeratul is invisible, he has the ability to blink, which is a short-range teleport, and Void Prison can stun enemies and temporarily disable detection. And through the first shrine, stealth it is. Once we retrieve the first fragment of the prophecy, I guess that Zeratul never took the Duolingo course for Xel'Naga because we can't read it. Shortly thereafter, the mission's complexity expands. 4 Protoss Stalkers warp in to aid Zeratul. They're high durability, moderate damage ranged warriors with the ability to blink. Unlike Zeratul, they can attack flyers, but they are not cloaked. This increases the mission complexity quite a bit. The remainder consists of a variety of obstacles and events designed around picking the enemy defenses apart slowly, utilizing a fairly unique toolkit of abilities. The concept's pretty fresh, and the challenges are diverse. There are also some bonuses to destroy, hatcheries around the map, that are legitimately well hidden and reward exploration, which I appreciate. Another thing I like is that the small skirmish aspect of things helps players naturally understand Protoss shields without being taught. All Protoss units have 2 health bars, shields first and then normal health. Shields regenerate pretty rapidly when out of combat, meaning that Protoss excels at taking small little fights repeatedly with intermissions between. The game never has to explain this mechanic because the missions are designed to naturally teach you to play this way. Overall, we have a very controlled introduction to what Protoss is and what they do. Near the end, we meet up with High Templar Karass, who's hunting the Queen of Blades with his warriors. We work with his forces to eliminate a large Zerg roadblock, and we obtain the final prophecy before Kerrigan appears. What remains is an escape sequence. Karass may have been hunting the Queen of Blades, but he is definitely not suited to fight her. He and his forces are annihilated by Kerrigan, while Zeratul and his stalkers escape. They need to find someone who can decipher the prophecy. The Protoss missions are a fun little bit of variety. In theory, we can play all 4 of them right now, but I think they work well to break up the Terran missions and add a bit of spice throughout the rest of the campaign. But I know you did really enjoy talking about Dark Templar and Stalkers, didn't you? Well, don't fret, because I have another story that I want to tell you involving the same units. The story of the first time that I ever beat a professional player in a StarCraft tournament. The year was 2011, and Little Giant Grant was a Protoss player. I wasn't bad by any means, a solid ladder contender, but absolutely not professional quality by any means. But I did love playing in daily tournaments and qualifiers. It was pretty common for people of all skill levels to sign up back then. Just for the thrill of competition and maybe getting a chance to say that you played against a pro, even if you lost. This was not my first rodeo, but the Playhem Daily was going to turn out a little bit different than normal. After breezing through my first couple rounds, I hit the wall that should have ended my career. Team Liquid's very own Protoss superstar, Huck. Undeniably the best Protoss outside of Korea at the time. And given that I was also a Protoss player and definitely not in Korea, it meant that I was in fact worse than him. This game is so special to me, to the point that I still have the replay. Okay, that's sort of a lie. It's not like I put it on a flash drive and sleep with it under my pillow every night. I just emailed the replay to a friend after the game, and as a result, it's always going to be in my Gmail. As the game started, I was nervous. I was obviously going to lose, but I did have one advantage. Huck doesn't know who I am, and I know exactly how he plays. Any Protoss worth their salt did. He was the Protoss with top 3 control after all. You had to study him. So I devised a plan and set it into action. The early game started off rocky. I ended up slightly behind in the initial stalker shot trading, so I had to go and play defensively. I knew that Huck is a massive fan of Blink Stalkers, and his control with them is so exceptional that he's one of the few players that can hold an expansion in Wings of Liberty PvP. And that is exactly what I was banking on. I hit a Dark Shrine and made some Dark Templar, rushed them across the map, and up his ramp. This previously would have been an auto loss for me. Huck would spot the Templar, use sentries to force field until detection came online, and wipe the floor with me. But my plan relied on a recent balance update. The Archon, a unit merged from 2 Templar, had recently been upgraded to be a massive unit, and massive units break force fields on contact. So I run up the ramp, Huck nails the force field as expected, and I morph the Archon, breaking the field and getting a single Dark Templar into his base. Because he was going for Blink Stalkers, a decent army, sentries, and an expansion, Huck did not have detection online. Instead, he tries to force the base trade and builds a robotics facility for observers out on the map as a last gambit. But despite not having Blink, the defender's advantage means I win the Stalker trade. I find the Robo and take my very first win against a professional player. Looking back on it, this game is so bad. It's absolutely some guy winning a game they did not deserve because of a recent balance patch that people had not acclimated to yet. But I don't care in the slightest because I beat Huck and that was really cool. Unfortunately, right here, I have to admit that there's been a little bit of deception. Because while I absolutely did beat Huck, and this game played out exactly as I described, it is not possible to play Wings of Liberty replays anymore, even using unscrupulous methods. Trust me, we tried. This entire replay had to be fabricated. I understand that as time goes on, the march of better technology will sometimes make old content invalid. But I do think that once things like Wings of Liberty are abandoned, the companies should put some investment into preserving it. Being able to play these old replays is not some technological issue. It's just a few broken hex IDs and a series of authentication tokens that have no active server. We still have access to the clients, the maps, and the replays to make it all work. It's just when the lights were turned off, the security system was still kept on. I understand why a company wouldn't want to bother taking the extra steps to making these sorts of things work, but if you want a franchise to build a legacy, I think it's important to take steps to preserve it. Returning to the campaign, these invisible units seem like they're pretty good. Let's go unlock some. We are headed to Breakout, the final mission in Tosh's questline, and we're gonna get another split choice mission, which means once again, it's time for a little bit of character analysis before we make our decision. Tosh is interesting. He's quite weird, overbearing, and constantly talks cryptically. Most of the time when a mission ends, everybody will have something to say about what went down, and Tosh will speak in a more predictive way, and often with metaphor.
Something there they want. Something made of honey maybe. Buzzing little bees.
He is obviously manipulating us to get Jorium from the gold minerals and Terrazine for its mind-altering properties. He's holding a lot of secrets, but when confronted about it, he totally admits it.
It's true. We are called Spectres. We all have our secrets, Mr. Rena. Doesn't mean I'm any threat to you.
We end up with a character that is very difficult to grasp, very secretive, obviously dangerous, will do what it takes to get what he wants, but he's not a liar, and he says that he isn't a threat to us. He just wants to bust his boys out of New Folsom maximum security prison. But suddenly, the Hyperion gets a call. Nova Terra, the protagonist of the critically acclaimed Xbox shooter StarCraft Ghost, appears and tells us that actually Tosh is lying, deceiving, and dangerous. And we know we can trust Nova because we played an entire game as her. We know everything that she's about. Well, that was the idea anyway. StarCraft Ghost never came out. Instead of having a fan favorite show up to accuse the man we've been working with of massive deception, she's just some random person. Actually, she's worse than a random person, because she is a special operative working for the Dominion. There is zero reason to trust her. But I'm a big fan of waifus, so of course, we all know that Tosh is the better waifu, and we're gonna side with him. Get wrecked, Nova. Come back once you get your own campaign. Breakout is an interesting mission. The road to New Folsom Prison is highly guarded. We get the commando unit Tosh to peel apart their defenses. The map is a long single path, and AI Jimmy will constantly make infantry squads to assist us. Generally, I'm not the biggest fan of missions where you control a single unit, and if it dies, you lose. I have a lot of bad memories from being a kid playing Warcraft 2 and Command & Conquer, getting absolutely frustrated with these missions. But on Breakout, I'm more okay with it, because Tosh's kit is designed from the ground up to not let him die. And that makes things feel significantly better. First off, he's cloaked. Just like Zeratul before, he's invisible and can't be hit by the enemy unless he walks into detection range. And when you do walk in, Tosh's first ability, Mind Blast, deals damage in an area and stuns everybody hit. It has no cooldown, which means you can chain the stun too, removing tons of enemy damage output. And his second ability, Psy Shield, is a giant personal shield. And then about 1/3 of the way through the mission, we unlock Consumption, which damages Rainer's units in exchange for energy, meaning we can spam all of our abilities. And then to make things even more durable, Jim makes a lot of medics, and they will automatically heal Tosh. As a result, things feel pretty good to play. Tosh can support as a tank when needed, or can stealth away and become a saboteur. The mission has an idea with a prison break scenario, and executes it well. But in my personal opinion, I think the no-build missions are where StarCraft 2 has its weakest design. In both of the other games that I've done big retrospectives on, Age of Mythology and Warcraft 3, I think these sorts of missions are some of the best in the game. Exploring around, delving in dungeons, finding secrets and items, and tons of little events that are really fun. Even StarCraft 1 did this decently. I don't think that the focused nature of StarCraft 2's missions were necessarily required for these types of missions. I would much prefer a big area to explore and figure out how to break open the prison on my own, maybe multiple different options to do so. Just busting open the front feels a little bit normal. But it is fun getting 4 nuclear bombs and having free reign to either slip off to the side and drop them on the enemy production, or to use them to bust your way through the front. More of that stuff would have been very welcome. Overall, Breakout is a mission that did exactly what it set out to do, but I think it could have had a more ambitious design. Once the Dominion garrison is gone and the prisoners are free, the covert storyline ends on a fairly serious note. Tosh espouses a view that the revolution is only about revenge. There will always be more tyrants, but the Spectres are going to get revenge on the Dominion for experimenting on them. While Matt Horner is the dreamer for a better future, he cares for the political dissidents and free thinkers that have been rescued here. His revolution is about freedom. I really like this moment. A lot of video game plots get lost in the forever growing scope and scale of whatever conflict is happening, to the point that the human element becomes muddled or lost. And yeah, I'm partially talking about later expansions of StarCraft. This dialogue and outcome, I think, is a good reminder that any sort of movement has a plethora of different motivations, perspectives, and goals. The revolution against the Dominion is a group of people who are all loosely pointed in the same direction, but often comprised of people who can't even agree on what revolution means. With that said, Tosh and his Spectres have officially joined the revolution. But what happens if we decide to believe Nova and betray Tosh? Fortunately, this storyline is not nearly as cataclysmic of a lore breakdown as Safe Haven. Instead, it's just kind of a mediocre mission. Just like with Breakout, Ghost of a Chance is a no-build mission, with the damage-oriented Nova being played instead of the defensive Tosh. There are 3 sections where we get various groups of units, and we need to use them tactically to clear through the enemies on a way to destroy objectives. I do like how the first 2 objectives are themed on the missions that we've done for Tosh already. First, we blow up the Jorium stockpile with the gold minerals from Redstone, and second, we blow up the tanks of Terrazine from Belshir. If they didn't do this, nobody would have complained, but it's nice to see that they connected at all. The mission starts off pretty good. Our infantry squad and Nova are separated. She can cover them as they clear to this high ground, and then when the high ground is cleared, Nova can move around and bust open this gate and unite forces. We get Nova's mind control spell to supplement her ability to snipe biological targets, kill some Spectres for bonus objectives, and take down the Jorium stockpile. In part 2, we clear a landing zone. We get some Reapers, a flying Raven spellcaster, and some siege tanks. And this is the part that I really like. This is a weird little set of units, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. The Raven can toss down point defense drones to block projectiles, the Reapers can jump up and down cliffs, and the siege tank can shell from absurdly long ranges. This is perfect for clever interactions. We can slowly peel apart the defenders using eccentric composition. The map has multiple different routes, and we even have to explore to find all the Spectres for the bonus objective. It's genuinely great, I like it a lot. And we get a nuke to launch, which is always fun. And then in part 3, we get some Vikings and Banshees, which are flying air-to-ground damage dealers. This part has the same sort of idea as part number 2, but the units aren't nearly as interesting, so it doesn't quite hit the same mark. But the unfortunate constant truth about this mission is that Nova's mind control ability trivializes everything. She can only mind control one target at a time, but mind control is effectively an instant kill spell that also gives you a unit, and she regenerates energy fast enough that she gets another cast of it every 60 seconds or so and can hold up to 5. This mission was really close to scratching that exploration no-build itch for me. Part 2 absolutely does, and the first part is an introduction to the mission, so it's completely fine, but I think the home stretch needed a bit more refinement. One thing worth mentioning here is that you may have noticed that Nova, just like Tosh, is cloaked, but the Spectres we're killing are not. Wings of Liberty has exactly 0 cloaked enemies throughout the entire campaign. There are burrowed Zerg, but they cannot attack while burrowed. This decision is one that I think is fine on casual and normal difficulty. Cloaked stuff is very chaotic and stressful to deal with, but I think it would be okay to mix it up every once in a while with a couple cloakers. Maybe in the mid to later stages of the campaign on hard and brutal. From now on, we're gonna have cloakers in our arsenal, and it just feels weird when the enemy sends units that we have that we can cloak, and they just don't use the ability. Once Nova has destroyed Tosh's Spectre training facility, we get a kind of funny video cutscene where Tosh calls to taunt the crew and has a voodoo doll that he tries to hurt Jim with, only to reveal that he accidentally voodooed Tychus instead, who's getting tossed around the cantina. Then Nova assassinates him, and we're done. We never hear from Nova again, and Tosh is not aboard our ship because he's dead, which I think is the worst part of this entire route. Tosh often has interesting things to say after missions, and will continue to if we let him live. But if we side with Nova, we just completely lose out on that. This is true for the late Dr. Hanson as well. For most of the missions that we're doing, if we hadn't finished her storyline, she would still have things to say. But at least she's gone in both of the options, so it doesn't feel as bad. Overall, I feel kinda bad for the dev team here. They decided to keep Nova in as a piece of fan service to the people who wanted to play StarCraft Ghost but would never get the opportunity to. I don't blame the team at all for this one. I think they salvaged it enough to make things make sense, but the scenario here is never going to shine. But it is really funny how if you pick Nova, everybody just assumes that given Jim's history with Kerrigan, he just has a thing for ghosts.
Scary female assassin type that's gonna wind up trying to kill you someday? I don't know, Hotshot. She sure seems like your type.
Yeah, you ignorant Steve.
It seems like a good time for another Zeratul memory. We're going to Zakul to find the Protoss preservers who can decipher the prophecy. But to reach them, we have to learn how Protoss building works. Because we only have 4 missions to learn everything Protoss, a Sinister Turn acts as a crash course on all the basics. There are a bunch of abandoned Protoss structures around that we can use the pylon structure to provide power to and reactivate. Almost every Protoss structure requires pylon power to operate, and the pylon that provides it does double duty as a supply structure. Fortunately, due to the campaign electrocuting us earlier, we have a pretty decent gist on how Protoss works. Honestly, we've fought them so much at this point that if you don't have a clue, you haven't been paying attention. In addition to our Protoss forces, there are enemy Protoss on this planet. They were once guardians of the preservers that Zeratul seeks, but they have been corrupted. The new master of this place is Mar, a hybrid being created from the form and essence of the Zerg and the Protoss. Zeratul, in shock, says this.
Who created this atrocity?
Right now, anybody who hasn't played StarCraft 1 is like, whoa, yeah, great question, Zeratul. And everybody who has played StarCraft 1 is having a meltdown. I'm gonna make this really quick, but here's a TLDR. In the Brood War expansion of StarCraft 1, the United Earth Directorate came to invade the Krapulu sector and enslave the Zerg. They meet a guy named Samir Duran, who helps them a lot, and then proceeds to assassinate their second in command. It was then revealed that Duran was an infested Terran, working under Kerrigan to weaken everybody who would stand against the Zerg. Eventually, Duran used the Swarm to destroy the Dark Templar capital city of Talametros, and then vanished. But the Dark Templar followed Duran to a secret laboratory where he was making a Zerg and Protoss hybrid. You know, like the ones right here. Duran then admitted he was not an infested Terran, but actually an ancient being who was creating these hybrid for an even greater master. So which Dark Templar followed Duran to this moon and got this information? Zeratul! So, yeah, great question, Zeratul. Who could have created this abomination? You're the one with the information, please tell us. There are a couple things like this where the writers obviously couldn't figure out how to approach these missions without like 20 minutes of extra context being added on, so instead they just kind of make Zeratul act weird. As a result, there's a community meme where Zeratul is just an old senile fool who can't remember anything, is just making everything up and being dramatic. Anyway, lore inconsistencies aside, the Protoss are corrupted by the hybrid Mar. We need to defeat them and rescue the preservers from their prison. So from now on in the StarCraft plot, we are going to be dealing a decent bit with these hybrid, and of course if you've played Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void, you probably remember that they play a very, very important role in later on stuff. And some of that writing is not very good. However, this is a retrospective of StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty specifically. We cannot fault a game for setting up an interesting storyline and then someone else fumbling it down the line. And in this circumstance, yeah, I actually think that they did really well with the hybrid. I think that first of all, they look pretty cool. There are going to be a few different designs throughout the campaign, and they all look pretty solid. In fact, Mar wants to give Zeratul a close look at his new shiny model, so he attacks our base quite quickly. And already, Mar is one of the single strongest units in the game. He does good damage, and as soon as he's vanquished, he teleports back home, revives, and starts draining the Preserver's power, gaining increased strength and then attacking again. They do a good job with this. Mar doesn't attack with a big army at his back, so he is manageable, but the player's first encounter with a hybrid leaves them saying, these guys are incredibly tenacious and ridiculous for a single biological unit. Mar is strong enough that he could easily solo capital ships, which is pretty impressive for just a dude. And he's only getting stronger every time he comes back. So to fight him, we're gonna need some more firepower. To get tech more advanced than the basic melee zealot and ranged stalker, we have to venture onto the map and use more pylons to power more abandoned structures. Doing this gets us the anti-armor immortal, the invisible Dark Templar, and the spellcasting High Templar, which of course I later used to electrocute my enemies on a bridge, for old time's sake. This set of 3 bonus units is nicely spaced out so that each new unit is introduced slowly, but at the same time we can learn about 3 new Protoss units in one mission. 4 if you count merging pairs of Dark and High Templar into an anti-biological Archon. Overall, a Sinister Turn is a well-designed mission. Mar is strong and constantly in your face, but you always have vision of him and he talks a lot, letting you know when it's time to defend. As a result, the mission switches very cleanly between attacking the Protoss bases, pulling back, finishing off Mar, continuing the assault, pulling back, fighting Mar once again, rinse and repeat. It rewards planning and time management. One final thing I like about this mission's design is that once you reach the final base, it completely flips the script for tempo. Instead of switching between attacking and defending against Mar, you enter the same way that he leaves, making it basically impossible to accidentally miss him and die to a counterattack during the final big fight. Eventually, the might of the Protoss defeat the hybrid and the Preservers start to decipher the prophecy. It begins with a great hunger and ends in utter darkness. Zeratul interprets the Great Hunger as the Overmind, the original leader of the Zerg, and sets off to its final resting place on Aiur. One thing that's really nice about these Protoss missions is that instead of giving us credits, they give about twice the normal number of research points. We're rocking and unlocking real quickly now. While most of the laboratory researches are passive upgrades, there are 2 tiers that give you new units. We're getting the Hercules Transport and the Raven Flying Spellcaster. I don't hate the idea of having mutually exclusive laboratory upgrades unlock a unit of your choice. It adds to the replay value and customization. But I don't like how all you have to go off of is a small text blurb and a 360p video. I think that if we actually got to play around with the units a little bit before picking them, it would be a lot more fair. Unfortunately, a lot of poor souls have unlocked the Predator precisely because of this lack of information. The Predator is a fast melee unit that does some crazy damage, but the combination of low durability and an astronomical cost means that they're one of the worst units in the game. Meanwhile, the Hercules Transport alternative is going to do some heavy lifting in the future. Alright, my memory time again. Remember MLG?
Welcome to MLG 2011 Championship Sunday.
This game has brought us all here together.
Nowadays, the concept of Major League Gaming is relegated to memes about air horns and a bygone era, but they were an early adopter in American esports. I actually played in the open bracket of 4 of them. I traveled to the venues, registered for the open bracket, and played until I got knocked out. Twice in Anaheim, once in Dallas, and once in the forsaken wasteland known as Columbus, Ohio. I never took a series off of a pro player, but I did always get knocked out by them. Players like Jinro and Hasuobs. I got wrecked by Jinro, but I did take a game off of Hasuobs by abusing the stupid cannon rush spot on Daybreak. I'm not a super cheesy player, I promise, it's just how Protoss versus Protoss goes. I was never able to make it to the level of being able to reliably take games off of pros in a tournament setting. I was always a step below that, despite the fact that I grinded the game a freaking lot in the first couple years. A big part of that is having the right tools for the job. It's sort of funny to remember now, but StarCraft 2 had pretty high performance requirements when the game came out, and my old second-hand laptop was not fit for the job. On minimum graphics, I would start games stuttery, and it only got worse as armies got bigger. Creep in particular would destroy my FPS and would be part of the reason that I stopped playing Zerg entirely for a bit. My game was so laggy and jittery that I had to rely entirely on macro to overwhelm people with a tidal wave of units that I just couldn't control. It's pretty funny to think back on that, given nowadays I'm known as the person who beats RTS without losing a unit, which is largely down to precise unit control. In the summer of 2011, I got a real PC. There was no more lag and I could learn to micro. And then 2 months later, I moved into the place I would live for my second year of university, only to learn that they had dial-up. In 2011, I didn't even know they offered dial-up past 2002. And remember, you can only have one dial-up or phone connection active at once, so there were 5 university-aged housemates there for 6 months where only one person could use the internet or make a phone call at a time. Well, we could make phone calls because we all had smartphones. But still, it was ridiculous. The only time that I could play for 6 months was between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Thank goodness I'm not a productive member of society, otherwise those hours would have been impossible. StarCraft really was the first mainstream Western esport. The concept was incredibly novel at the time, and while tournaments did exist for many games before, it hit a scope and scale that was previously unreachable. Partially due to the advent of live streaming on places like Twitch and YouTube finally allowing videos longer than 10 minutes. Before Twitch, if you wanted to watch a live stream of a tournament, you had to settle for an awful blurry 240p webcast viewed on the GOM player that you had to download. And then you just trusted that Tasteless and Artosis were not lying to you about what was going on because the picture quality was so abysmal that you weren't sure if the video feed was a Terran vs Zerg on Xel'Naga Caverns or an episode of Blue's Clues. The experience was absolutely horrible and a complete waste of time. I tuned in for every broadcast and I have zero regrets. Back in the game, I think that these Mobius guys were under attack and they needed help ASAP, and instead we decided to have Jim look at a rock for a while and then started longing for the battle days of dial-up. So let's go rescue them. We kind of need their artifact money after all. So we contact Mobius's lead scientist to get a grip on the situation, and his name is Dr. Narude. Seriously? I genuinely don't know what Blizzard was thinking here. I can read backwards. And oh hey, Kerrigan is here too, and she can also read backwards because she instantly says she can see through this pathetic charade. This whole thing is super weird. Imagine as a writer trying to disguise who a character is and then just deciding to have another character instantly tell them how bad their disguise is. This is quite the bamboozle. Either way, Mobius facilities are under attack with Kerrigan herself leading the assault. She's searching for data about the artifacts, and there isn't time to extract it, so we gotta blow up the data cores before Kerrigan can access them. To help with this, we get the Medevac, a flying dropship that has a healing beam like a medic. We start off on an island, and there are many different pieces of difficult to cross terrain scattered around the map, making transports invaluable. And because Medevacs have an infantry healing beam, we can drop the vehicles for a bit and go back to basics. Overall, mechanically, the Mobius Factor is a quite solid mission. The theming of flying transports around a ruined city, finding allies to rescue on the rooftops is solid. It almost feels like a scenario that you'd have in a shooter, and it's pretty novel in the RTS setting. And it's great that the Medevac is useful here too, because in the rest of the campaign, it kinda sucks. In multiplayer, Medevacs are one of the best units in the game. The tactical flexibility of a dropship combined with sustaining an infantry ball is unparalleled. But in the campaign, there is so much random anti-air everywhere that slowly whittles them down. Even then, it would be an acceptable cost for their utility, but they have to compete with the medic. And the medic has a big advantage of being able to heal other medics. But when you gotta get around, the Medevac is perfect for the job, and that's what we're doing here. It's kinda weird, but I don't have a whole lot else to say about the Mobius Factor. The mission is simple, 3 data cores to destroy, we have to take them out before Kerrigan reaches them, make sure to kill the Brutalist bonus objective, and find the friends around the map. It's a very simple mission compared to what we've been doing, but I think that a back to basics is a nice reprieve. One thing that makes the mission feel good to play is that dropships in StarCraft actually feel good to use. I play a lot of older RTSs, and one of the common threads between them is that transports just feel like a clunky mess. The fact that I have a bunch of Medevacs full of troops and only have to click unload once and then pick the location and it just works for all of them is such a breath of fresh air. Try doing that with Warcraft 2 boats. So yeah, overall, it's a good mission. It rewards exploration, every infantry type is good, the tempo is nice. Honestly, my only qualm is that I was having a good enough time that the mission could have been a bit longer. And that's a good problem to have. After the mission ends, Narud, PhD, tells us that Kerrigan is seeking the artifacts because they were made by the Xel'Naga, an ancient race of beings that created both the Zerg and the Protoss. She wants the artifacts because she fears their power. And then we get a cinematic. New Gettysburg is the place that Mengsk deployed psi emitters to lure a Zerg invasion to the Confederate capital, abandoning Kerrigan to the swarm in the process. The original version of this event wanted the player to experience being overwhelmed from Kerrigan's perspective, so we played it in-game, but I appreciate that they went back and let us see this very important event from another perspective. Jim, on the other hand, is not so happy to be reliving these events. He's passed out drunk at the cantina. Matt tries to encourage him and then tries to confront him about his constant drinking. And this story right here showcases the most important flaw of the open-ended progression system for Wings of Liberty. Jim clearly has a drinking problem. Sometimes. At the beginning of the campaign, he absolutely did, and then right before Zeratul appeared, he was drinking from his flask. And now he's passed out from it, and Matt implies that this is a common occurrence. But depending on how you play through this campaign, the order that you take the missions, this can be a common pressing theme. Or if you happen to take a route similar to what I did here, it just is absent for a very long time. They wanted to address a very real and very human problem, and I think that's an admirable piece of difficult storytelling. But because it only happens during one quest line, it's very easy for it to not have that dramatic oomph. It's inconsistent at best. Particularly because we only see it during cutscenes. Whenever we get into a mission, Jim is perfectly fine as a commander. He's not wasted, he's in complete control, does everything as always, and it works out. This isn't the biggest deal. Most of the time, it's minimized instead of focused on. But I do think that there is good potential for this type of storytelling about a man who claims to be fighting for the people while simultaneously damaging himself and others through destructive habits. But I genuinely don't know how you would properly fit this sort of storytelling into such a freeform structure. But I do know something that does fit well into StarCraft storytelling, and that is stealing a giant robot. A long while back, we found that adjutant who had records of Mengsk's crimes on Tarsonis. Now we need to distribute these recordings to the people. But to do that, we need to get control of the UNN broadcasting studios on the capital of Korhal, somewhere that we are not getting a force to easily. So instead of invading the most heavily protected Terran planet, we're headed to a secret Dominion weapons testing facility, where Tychus and friends will bust in and steal the enormous Odin combat walker. The original plan is to hide Tychus in the Odin, wait for it to get shipped to Korhal for a military parade, and then use it to cause chaos as a distraction. But Tychus can't quite figure out the Odin's comms. And if he can't hear people telling him to stop smashing stuff, he's gonna smash stuff. Welcome to one of the few good escort missions in gaming. Turns out, if the thing that you are escorting is a multi-story tall death robot, it is significantly more fun. Which does explain why the other good escort missions involve Liberty Prime. The Odin is an absolute monster. There are 5 Dominion bases to fight that cover about 80% of the entire map, and Tychus's new ride will be doing a majority of the damage to all of them. We just have to keep him patched up and take down dangerous flyers. As long as we can do that, Tychus will take care of the rest. We get the Wraith, a unit that is very similar to the Firebat in that they are both StarCraft 1 units and are very undertuned as a result. They cloak, have decent anti-air, and abysmal anti-ground, but really they just cost too much. But right here, they do the job, because the Odin is such a beefcake and hits astronomically hard. One thing I adore about this mission is how Tychus is having the absolute time of his life. He's constantly chattering and gives off the vibe of a kid in a candy shop.
Okay, flashy red button, what do you do? Boom, baby. Damn, now that is hot.
It really feels like this is a turning point for Tychus. Most of the time he's been fairly skeptical about all this raider business. Saving the colonists and going after stuff for Tosh didn't really interest him, but now that he realizes you can both be the good guys and blow stuff up, he's getting a bit more revolutionary. This is another mission where auto repair from the SCV really makes it playable and fun. Following the Odin around and constantly patching it up without that many button presses is truly why this works out. And I can't imagine how awful it would be in the original StarCraft where you would constantly have to spam click on the Odin to keep it repaired. I know it seems silly, but I genuinely do think that auto repair is the glue that holds Terran together sometimes. It makes the impossible possible. Overall, this is just another very solid mission. The only thing I find a bit sad is that there's a bonus objective to destroy the Loki, an elite battlecruiser boss, and the only thing you get from it is an achievement. It's a small thing, but it would be cool if it mattered a bit more. Once we're back on the Hyperion, Tychus can't help but be excited about what just went down.
Brother, it is the single greatest creation in the history of mankind.
Tychus is going to get his shot to pilot the Odin again soon, but before we use it to get access to the UNN studios, we should probably talk about the Universal News Network, because Kate Lockwell and Donnie Vermillion are simultaneously two of the least important and best characters in this game. After almost every mission, there's an available news segment to watch, and the two newscasters are great. Donnie Vermillion is the blatant parody of government propaganda.
Donnie Vermillion, UNN, your first, last, and only stop for the truth.
Donnie is kind of an idiot and is always failing to spin Raynor's actions into either heinous misdeeds, or if they're good, try to give the Dominion credit for it. Meanwhile, the field reporter Kate Lockwell is the not-so-subtle supporter of Raynor's raiders and is pretty sharp, making for some funny scenarios.
Kate, if I revealed that, I'd be giving away vital Dominion secrets.
You think the Zerg watch our broadcast?
I know they do, Kate. I know they do.
Well, you heard it here first, folks.
The broadcasts are all around great in so many different ways. They provide a glimpse into the goings-on of the world outside of the Hyperion, showcase what information the general public is being fed, discusses the Zerg invasion in a larger scale which makes it seem like a sector-wide threat, and provides an avenue to introduce new characters to the story before they interact with the Raiders. The Dominion General Warfield, Emperor Arcturus Mengsk, and his son Valerian Mengsk are all natural to have on the TV during a crisis. And it does a good job of establishing them beforehand, while not spoiling who's going to be important for what reasons later on. I have never met a single person that doesn't like the TV broadcasts. It is a genius system that solves so many different storytelling problems while writing some stories of their own. Speaking of stories, we still have some time to kill before the Odin can get to Korhal, so let's hear a bit more about what Zeratul is doing. Last we left off, Zeratul was heading to Aiur to make contact with the dead Overmind in order to decipher more of the prophecy. But you know what they say, where there's a city-sized block of dead Zerg leader, there's bound to be lots of Zerg. And to fight them off, we find an abandoned base with some colossi, powerful war machines that were sealed away long ago under the water. Please ignore the fact that they were on the former Protoss homeworld of Aiur, and these Titans of War were for some reason not used to fight off the Overmind when it first invaded. It can be really difficult to remember all the small details from StarCraft 1 when designing these missions, so these things happen. One thing I really like about this mission is how the devs remembered a really niche mechanic from StarCraft 1 and expanded on it. When Zeratul assassinated the Cerebrate Zaz, he briefly came into contact with the beast. In that moment, his mind was linked directly to the Overmind, and that is how the Zerg learned the location of Aiur, and were able to launch their invasion. This mission, consisting of bringing Zeratul to connect with the Overmind's tendrils for information, is a nice throwback to that idea. Well done. This is another mission where there are alternating periods of attack and defense. Normally, the Zerg send frenzied attack waves through Nidus worms or over the ground. We'll be overwhelmed if we're not at home to defend, and then once everything is secure, we can move out and attack. Mechanically, the Protoss here is not that different from their previous mission. The only new combat unit is the Colossus, but its design is pretty cool, so we'll talk about it. The Colossus is statistically overpowered for its cost, an absolute monster damage dealer in an area with a really long range. It shreds groups of low to medium durability targets, it's fairly bulky, and it can walk up and down cliffs. It can even walk over your own units. The only negative is that the Colossi can be attacked by anti-ground and anti-air weapons, making them the most vulnerable unit in the game. A large downside to make up for the cataclysmic power it holds. I really like the design. I learned the incredible power of cutting up batches of Zerg units and roasting them with Colossi very early in my StarCraft career, and it feels good to do so. One thing to note about this map is that they took the time to design it off of the final mission of the original Protoss campaign in StarCraft 1. In that mission, you had to control two armies at the same time, a Terran force led by Jim Raynor in one corner and Tassidar's Protoss in the opposite corner, with the Overmind between them. If you take this map and flip it 180 degrees, the bases are there. The bottom right of the map is filled with infested Terran and their base. That means that these are X-Rainer's raiders that fell to the Zerg. Similar to the Mobius Factor, this is another mid to late game that just has a good tempo to it. Once you get into the swing of things and everything gets a momentum, it generally feels fun to play. Defend a little bit, go out and clear, come back, be ready for the next hit, and repeat. Each time that Zeratul reaches an Overmind tendril, he channels for a bit, dissects the Overmind's emotions, and moves on. And once we reach the final tendril, we are approached by the ghost of Tassadar, who speaks to Zeratul. Tassadar is the first Protoss who got along with the Terrans and eventually sacrificed himself to destroy the Overmind. This is just a personal preference in storytelling, but I think that if you're gonna heroically sacrifice someone in your story, they should stay dead. Even if they come back as a spirit, I'm just not a big fan. And while this is out of the scope of a Wings of Liberty video, the actual answer about what's happening here is also not great. Either way, what Zeratul thinks is the ghost of Tassadar appears and tells the Dark Templar of the Overmind's true nature. When the Xel'Naga created the Overmind, they gave it immense intelligence, but not free will. It was bound to the will of his creators and hated them for it. So with his intelligence, he set a plan into motion. He found the most psionically potent Terran he could, Sarah Kerrigan, and infested her, rebuilding her body into something specifically designed to lead the swarm, but not bound by his creators. And then, when the Overmind was slain by a joint effort of Terran and Protoss, the Zerg were freed from the shackles of the Xel'Naga, with Kerrigan to lead them. I really like this. The Overmind is one of my favorite StarCraft characters. He's just so freaking cool whenever he shows up. And if there's any character who's so galaxy-brained that they can use loopholes to break what is effectively mind control, it has to be the being called the Overmind. What an absolute Chad. While we're on the topic of absolute Chads, I wanted to talk about one more StarCraft game that I played a long time ago that made a big impression on me. Beating Huck was not the first time I played a pro player. Obviously, nobody accidentally beats a pro in a tournament on the first try. My first tournament game against a pro player was in late 2010, when I was a newbie little Zerg player still figuring out which race I wanted to main. I wasn't bad at Zerg by any means, and I signed up for the open qualifiers for the Team Liquid Star League. I didn't think I was gonna qualify or even do decently. It was entirely to have fun and just see how things went. But I was quickly stonewalled when in the first round I matched against a monster of a Protoss player. The map was Scrap Station, a funny little horseshoe-shaped thing. And as I loaded in on my jittery, low FPS, half-functional laptop, I knew all I could do is give it my best. And I very quickly discovered that having a good ladder rating is nothing compared to being a professional. There was a style at the time called sharking, where you would expand off of 3 gateways, make lots of sentries, and then just sit in front of the Zerg. If they moved too far forward, you cut them into pieces with force field, shave off their army, and then safely move back home after forcing them to cut worker production to defend. Damaged and on low economy, I tried to take a third base, and so did he. I amassed a decent group of roaches and hydras, but a 3 Colossus army supported by stalkers and sentries ate me for breakfast. It was the single most one-sided match I had ever played. In fact, it was so absolutely crushing that I switched to Protoss on the spot. Fortunately, my opponent in control was an incredibly nice guy, and while he waited for his next match, he was kind enough to chat up young Grant and give him some pointers. As somebody who knew him from streams and tournament broadcasts and YouTube, I was shocked that not only would he talk to someone like me, but he was nice too. That was my only interaction with In Control, or any esports personality of the time. But now, with a more mature and nuanced understanding of the internet, as both a creator and a viewer, I can say definitively that we were so goddamn lucky. The role models in the early StarCraft scene were some of the most impressive, passionate, and reasonable people, and they drove the scene for years. Early 2010s internet was an absolute cesspit. It was the early days of algorithmically driven content, but content moderation had not caught up, and it randomly boosted the most awful people at times. This was the era of these absolutely horrible prank videos, and a lot of incredibly hateful people being mask-off degenerates while Call of Duty montages played in the background. Meanwhile, the StarCraft scene was popped up by these creators who wanted nothing more than to share their passion, their knowledge, and their understanding. They'd stop at nothing to make each other laugh, while the rest of the internet was trying to make strangers cry for content. When the rest of the internet was scamming their own audience to make a quick buck, they'd give back to the community by self-funding their own freaking professional esports team because they loved the game so much. We were an absolutely blessed bunch of little nerdling viewers. Community is king, and we had such a good one. The Odin is prepped and ready on Core Hall, and that means exactly one thing. It's time to cause a bit of chaos. Media Blitz is the legally required sneak attack mission. Someone at Blizzard absolutely adores the concept of getting a few minutes to cause havoc in the enemy bases before the mission starts, and I'm honestly glad that they do because it's always a ton of fun. We've done this in Brood War, Warcraft 3, and now what I personally consider the best incarnation on Media Blitz. Because if sneak attacks are fun, then sneak attacks with 20-story tall death robots are the gaming equivalent to going to Disneyland. So let's take the Dominion for a bit of a ride. Being completely honest here, I had to contrive this entire mission to make it worth watching and have talking points. We have 4 minutes to smash as much as we want with the Odin, and there are 3 main enemy bases: an anti-light unit base, a factory base, and a starport base. Being a challenge runner, at some point in the past, I had to devise an incredibly specific route for this mission to complete a challenge, which means I know how to knock everybody out in the mission by the 5-minute mark. But I actually think that's good. It's nice to have something where the player can reasonably down one of the first 3 bases on their first try, and then when they come back for a replay, they can do even better. It gives an immediate measure of growth. Given that I know what I'm doing here and wanted a little bit of an extra challenge, I decided to clear out the expansion bases on the map instead of the main enemy bases. That way, the aggression will be as hard as possible once we get into the macro portion. But the most important takeaway during the sneak attack is that during a lot of missions, including this one later on, having a giant death unit can sort of get lost in the scope of the rest of your army. This sneak attack gives a nice opportunity to feel the might of the Odin itself before moving on to building armies. Once the timer expires, Matt has built us a nice little base to work with, and it's time to clear out the rest of the opponents and control the UNN broadcast towers. Also, ignore the fact that I keep stepping on random Core Hall civilians with the Odin. We're the good guys, I swear. The attacks on Media Blitz are a big bump up in difficulty. The anti-light, factory, and starport bases each take turns sending some pretty strong attack waves against us, with the idea being that knocking out one of the bases means there's now a big hole in the rotation to get things done. And of course, the Odin is pretty good at holding things off as well. Because I didn't clear any of the bases during the sneak attack, I have to make use of the best Terran defensive tools. Siege tanks, sensor towers, missile turrets, and the new Thor unit are all great for holding positions. The Thor is basically the baby Odin. It can shoot ground, it can shoot air, it's big, bulky, does high damage, and is slow. It's a shame they don't let us actually build Odins, but the Thor is a decent substitute. My favorite part of Media Blitz is that after the sneak attack is done, that's kind of the end of mission mechanics for a while. We're gonna have to upload at the broadcast towers later, but a large majority of the mission is just a straight up brawl against another Terran opponent. While I do think the mission variety and having lots of stuff to do is one of Wings of Liberty's strongest aspects, I do appreciate that a couple times during the endgame, we're just given a sandbox to play with the tools we've unlocked and take things at our own pace. There's a lot of money on the map, and the game just lets you play some StarCraft. There's also a nice little reward for exploration. If we destroy this science facility in the bottom right, we unlock the only secret mission in the campaign. Once we have a big army and have cleared out one of the bases, we can move a unit onto the point at the UNN broadcasting tower, and the Dominion General Warfield sends reinforcements to defend. One subtle thing that I appreciate about these waves is that they're intentionally different than whatever the base initially had. The anti-light base sends lots of flyers, the factory base sends Vikings and Reapers, and the starport base sends ground vehicles. We counter a base's units, and then he tries to counter the counter. It obviously doesn't work because we win the mission, but it does make the general feel like a tactically flexible commander, which is going to be important later. Once we've cleared out all 3 bases and the broadcasts are complete, all of Dominion space now knows that their emperor has betrayed his fellow Terrans in the quest for power. Riots break out in the streets, Mengsk is being held to the fire in interviews, and revolution is no longer just aboard the Hyperion. This would normally be the end of Matt Horner's Revolution questline, but we aren't quite done here yet. In that science facility, we found top secret documents about hidden Dominion bioweapons lab. Its existence was buried enough that the boys feel that it could make a worthwhile trip, so let's begin the secret mission. Piercing the Shroud is another no-build mission, this time with Reimu himself leading the charge. On the SuperNova missions, I spoke about how no-build missions in StarCraft 2 tend to lack the RPG charm that their predecessors had. Piercing the Shroud is the clear exception to that. We breach into the facility and are quickly greeted by a terminal with a camera feed to the next room, and we have a choice. Do we activate the gun turrets on the left or the right-hand side? I go for the right to fight the squishy Marines, and once I've made my choice, the guns activate and we can dive in to support them. Then we enter the first laboratory, where we find tubes containing Protoss and Zerg DNA. After an ambush, we continue on, picking up some grenades, a sub-munition for Jim. They do a lot of area damage, but they have limited uses. After a short hallway comes another terminal, this time to a room with a containment cell. We can attack the Dominion garrison with a wave of Ultralisks, Zerglings, or Zealots. And then we have to try to monitor the fight and make sure that neither takes the upper hand, otherwise we'll get overwhelmed afterwards. In this lab, it becomes clear that the creatures in these tubes are being cloned, and the DNA is being artificially spliced. Throughout the next few minutes, we keep exploring and finding some interesting things. New sub-munitions like the plasma shot, getting a timed-life combat robot with our choice of weapons, and later on, getting a dropship of reinforcements with our choice of allies. The mission really captures the vibe of a dungeon crawl, slowly moving through and investigating this lab, trying to figure out what the Dominion is up to and how it connects with Zeratul visions, and getting to make a huge number of choices along the way. Jim also feels quite powerful because of the weapon pickups, but you also can't hoard them because there's a cap on them and it's pretty low. This entire trek feels like the no-build missions through Confederate facilities in the first StarCraft, but better in every way. They absolutely nailed the vibe and the gameplay complements it. It also recontextualizes things that we've seen before. During macro missions, the Brutalist bonus objective is pretty easy, but here with a small squad, it's clear how they earned their name. After a bit more exploring, it's clear to everybody involved that this lab is bad news and has to be taken offline. So the raiders destroy the fusion generator and then realize they have made a huge mistake. Another form of hybrid was being contained at the facility, and with the power gone, it has broken loose and is destroying everything. It's impervious to small arms fire, and we have to get out of here. What comes next is a chaotic escape sequence, where the hybrid is chasing us through the lab as escaped Zerg and Protoss fight against the remaining guards. Things are exploding, the lights are flickering, and everything is on fire. It's absolute chaos. We find some Protoss tech the Dominion was experimenting with and get to use the Chrono Rift device to create slowdown fields and make distance from the hybrid as we flee. By the time we get back to the beginning of the facility, the Zerg have planted eggs everywhere and the remaining Terran are being wiped out. All we can do is find a transport and barely make it out of the facility. I said it before and I will say it again. Wings of Liberty absolutely nailed the introduction of the hybrid. Single biological entities that vastly outclass any other living organism, and the Dominion is trying to grow them. This mission hits the mark in every possible way. I'm so glad it exists. The only problem I have with it is that the secret is so well hidden that I know a huge number of people were denied this experience, simply because they didn't find it on Media Blitz. It deserves to be played. With the Revolution finished, we're nearing the completion of the game's 5 core quest lines. There's a single Zeratul mission remaining and a few more artifacts to collect for the Mobius Foundation. We get a lead on the 4th artifact in the Typhon system, but right as we arrive, the star starts rapidly expanding. It's going Nova! If we want to get that artifact, we're going to have to drop down onto the planet and grab it before the star consumes everything. Listen, I know what you're thinking. But Crash Course Astronomy didn't come out until 2015. They had no way of knowing that this is not at all how a star works. This is very obviously the case of having a mission where they came up with the idea first and then tried to shoehorn in the lore justification afterwards. We're gonna have to suspend disbelief a bit here. But I'm okay with it, because while the fire wave consuming the planet is pretty hot, the mission SuperNova is pretty cool. Wait a minute, I did this joke already. Many people find SuperNova to be the hardest mission in the game. I don't think it's quite as hard as the finale, but it is definitely up there. We start off with a quick no-build section where we get the Banshee, a cloaked air-to-ground helicopter unit. This is the first strong air-to-ground tool that we have, so it's a welcome sight. After we clear an LZ for our base, we find that of course the Tal'Darim have taken up residence here, meaning that as the firewall from the exploding star approaches on the left, we're gonna have to fight our way through the Protoss on the right. The map is absolutely littered with resource bases, but they all have fairly low counts of minerals, meaning that the only option is to utilize Terran's flying buildings to migrate around the map as we fight. On paper, this is an absolutely brilliant idea for a mission that only works because Terran buildings can move. I really love the way that the mission was designed around a specific aspect of the faction. It really only works for Terran, or Night Elf, I guess. But the difficulty level is off the charts. The fire wave moves pretty fast, even on lower difficulties, and the resource bases are constantly expiring. Combine that with a legitimately strong Protoss, and it is a mess. Basically, they took defenses that were as strong as a normal StarCraft mission and then added all the moving mechanics on top. And honestly, I'm kind of fine with it. At this point, we're in the campaign's endgame. What we're going to be fighting is a gauntlet of missions that challenge every aspect of our StarCraft skill in preparation for the ultimate challenge in All In. And SuperNova is the multitasking challenge. During the mission, you're also expected to scout around thoroughly. The bonus objective relics that are scattered around are kinda hard to find, and the looming fire wave will destroy them if you don't find them in time. Thankfully, the Banshees carry hard here. The Protoss use almost entirely ground-based attacks, which means big stacks of rocket ladies are fantastic, as long as you avoid the area damage. Once the Protoss base in the middle of the map is gone, we move in and are presented with a choice. The map opens into two separate lanes, the south having a few additional bases, a relic, and a lot of money, and the north having a much weaker enemy base, followed by a sparsely defended area behind the objective, but very few resources to harvest. This is a good example of the campaign evolving over time and trusting the player with more responsibility. Because while it's true that this choice exists, I was pretty generous with the term presents. There's no Matt Horner or Tychus telling us about the two options, their costs, and their benefits. For the majority of the campaign, they would have held our hand here, but as we reach the end, you can see how the responsibility is being pushed onto us to figure it out. It's sort of like when a parent is teaching their kid how to ride a bike and is holding them steady, but suddenly lets go, and the kid doesn't notice that they're riding all by themselves, but now they're attacking the enemy base without any aid. The boys watching on the Hyperion must be so proud. This is another mission where repair comes in clutch. Cloaked Banshees are great, but the combination of detection and area damage means they will take a beating no matter what. Doubly so if you're recording this at 4 in the morning and accidentally fire a Seeker missile into your own army. The push into the final base is just some nice, solid Protoss opposition. Nothing gimmicky, no specialty unit bias, just a strong core with many different threats you have to dodge, snipe, and brawl with. SuperNova is one of the most memorable missions because it doesn't let up. The enemies aren't nerfed because of the fire mechanic. There's no gimmicks like finding derelict Terran buildings around the mission to make moving around easier. The only leniency you're afforded is that you're not required to build supply depots. If SuperNova existed in a traditional campaign, I would probably say that it's too hard, but in the context of Wings of Liberty, I think it's an enjoyable mountain to climb. With the final artifact secured, it's time to meet with Mobius and finally sell these alien paperweights. But when we reach the rendezvous site, 3 Dominion battlecruisers jump into the system, led by Emperor Mengsk's flagship, the Bucephalus. Jim and Tychus take action immediately. This ambush is their shot to take down the Emperor. And after fighting their way onto the bridge, they find Mengsk alone. But this is the wrong one.
You won't find my father here, Commander. I am Valerian Mengsk, and I own the Mobius Foundation. Through them, I own you as well.
Tell me why I shouldn't kill you right now.
Because I can offer you what you've always wanted. A chance to rescue Sarah Kerrigan.
Is it just me or is the ending to this cutscene really weird? It blacks out like we just finished this week's episode of StarCraft 2 on a dramatic cliffhanger, and now we have to excitedly wait for next week. But then the game just keeps going because, obviously, it's a game. So instead of characters in an RPG-style game just talking to each other, Jim has to sit on the Hyperion lab remembering the conversation that he just had off-screen. It's not a big deal, but I find it pretty funny. Crown Prince Valerian told? He told Jim that the artifacts are Xel'Naga in origin and can construct a device that the prince believes can remove Kerrigan's infestation. But only Jim knows Kerrigan's tactics and strategies well enough to get a force close to her. This is his chance to save her. As Jim mulls this new information over, the Hyperion crew is livid.
Assaulting Char is a suicide mission. You'd be putting all our lives on the line just to get your girlfriend back.
This is bigger than all of us, Matt. It ain't about me. This is the only real chance we're ever gonna get, and I'm taking it.
So which is it gonna be, Jimmy? We bringing Kerrigan back, or putting her in the ground?
Matt hates the idea of working with the Dominion and thinks that it's a trap. Tychus, on the other hand, likes the idea of de-infesting Kerrigan because it'll make her easier to shoot. All of the raiders have lost people to the Dominion, and now they're supposed to ally with them? All that for an alliance with somebody that they don't even get along with. But Jim is in charge, and Mobius has found the final Xel'Naga artifact fragment. So it's time to head off and complete the device. Maw of the Void is our final fight against the Protoss, and features the final unit that we'll be unlocking, the Battle Cruiser. Terran's answer to literally everything if you have enough of them. Battle cruisers are huge, expensive, and slow, but they have enough firepower to make the Protoss blush. Their armor is thicker than Gabriel Tosh, and the Yamato cannon is the closest thing that the game has to letting you just click on the opponent's unit and pressing the delete key. And Maw of the Void is the mission that's all about spamming masses of these bad boys. And I don't really like it. Not because I don't like making capital ships, I'm gonna be spending half of the remaining missions doing that. It's just that this mission forces you into mass battlecruiser style, and then I don't think it does a very good job. It's just not a good mission for them. The reason we need to use the cattle bruisers is that the world ship we're fighting over is covered in Ritfield generators, which shred non-shielded targets. Battlecruisers are our only unit durable enough to withstand the pain, and I think that part of the design is fine. The frustration comes from being a low economy mission. Our base is very low on resources, and there's only a single expansion. To make up for that, there is a bunch of money spread out on the map in the form of pickups, but if you actually add it all up, it's not very much. Like most people, when I was a kid, I loved spamming capital ships. I didn't care if it was carriers, Kirovs, or Chimera. No other genre can hit that specific charm of floating over your opponents with a wall of doom that vaporizes everything that it meets. This is purely my opinion, but having a limited economy here feels kinda bad. But I do know that I'm gonna have a big money opportunity later, so let's look at Maw of the Void for what it is. Moving through the Ritfield generators is a good mechanic. They do about 3 damage per second, which is catastrophic against a 55 hit point Marine, but survivable for a 550 hit point battlecruiser. But not survivable forever. It adds a nice level of tension to attacks, where you feel a desire to get a move on so you can retain as many units as possible. And I'll absolutely admit that if you had more money, then that tension would be substantially less. The Protoss defenses are nothing we haven't seen before, but there are a lot of them. A mix of high-tech Tal'Darim units whose shields render them immune to the Ritfields. Thankfully, our fleet is a really good way to remove those shields in a jiffy. Another thing I like is the bonus objective. It's really clever. There are 4 sets of imprisoned Dark Templar. Rescuing them has them join our side. Not only is their cloaking fantastic for defense, but being Protoss means that their shields don't care about the Ritfield. Overall, Maw of the Void is a deliberately slow mission. The map is doing its best spaghetti cosplay with how long and thin it is, meaning we have to be vigilant about counterattacks because the battlecruisers don't learn how to teleport until Legacy of the Void. As I clear through the defenses, let's talk a little bit about the Tal'Darim as a closing. Wait, hold that thought. Is that the outhouse that we blasted into space like 2 hours ago? Darn right it is. This Easter egg actually appears on every single space-based mission flying around in the background. I really appreciate Blizzard's Easter eggs. There are an absolute battlecruiser load of them strewn throughout these games. Heck, the Tauren Space Marine in the outhouse actually appears again in Legacy of the Void as an incredibly hard to find summonable super unit if you input the Konami code on the mission Templar's Charge. Stuff like that always makes these games feel like a labor of love, and I hope that they keep doing it forever. Anyway, the Tal'Darim. This faction is the perfect example of how character-based writing is almost always superior to having a big bad evil enemy. Ooh, so scary. There is absolutely nothing to talk about with the Wings of Liberty Tal'Darim. They were designed as a reason for the Terran to fight against the Protoss, and they accomplished exactly that task, but zero effort was put into developing the faction past that. The prime example of this is their leader. We've fought against Kerrigan, Nova, Tosh, Colonel Orlin, Selendis, Dr. Hanson's Ego, and Mar. And of course, all the Tal'Darim missions has a character who taunts us. And he doesn't have a name. They just call him Tal'Darim Executor. The only reason we know that his name is Nyon is because if you win 100 team games on Ladder, you unlock his portrait and that's what it's called. But throughout all of the story, up until the end, he's just Tal'Darim Executor. To Blizzard's credit, they heard this feedback that Tal'Darim were boring and they acted on it. During the Protoss expansion Legacy of the Void, they devoted time and effort to developing the Tal'Darim into one of the most fascinating cultures and sets of characters in the franchise. But they could at least have come back and given the Executor his name. The final fight before the Artifact Vault is a mothership. And once again we outrange it, this time with Yamato cannons. It's a different unit, but still the mothership is unable to hit us because the unit we unlocked on the mission is just better than it. It's kind of a weird trend. After the mothership falls and our nemesis Tal'Darim Executor dies, we collect the final artifact fragment from the vault and prepare to assault the Zerg homeworld of Char. Well, Jim does. Everybody else is upgraded from angry to infuriated about working for the Dominion. The rabble is roused, Tychus is smashed, and quickly he starts smashing. Jim has to intervene and beat up the drunk Marine, and then gives an incredibly lukewarm speech about how revolution is about saving lives, and if the Zerg wipes everybody out, then what's the point of overthrowing the Dominion? And then everybody realizes that, like, yeah, the math does check out, so I guess we're headed to Char. But only after one final stop, because Zeratul had one last vision for us, a glimpse into the future. In Utter Darkness is the climax of the Protoss sub-campaign and is masterfully executed. A vision of the apocalyptic end times in a world where Kerrigan has been killed and the Swarm has fallen under the control of the Dark Voice, the mastermind behind the hybrid. The objective is to hold out for as long as possible, reaching at least 2,500 kills before the last remaining Protoss in the galaxy are extinguished. This mission is so sick. The story and the vibes behind it are incredible. At the same time, the Dark Voice was built up as such a mysterious and interesting villain. Someone they've been alluding to since StarCraft 1, and yet we still know nothing about. To defend against his onslaught throughout the mission, the remaining Protoss commanders, Admiral Urun, Mohandar, Executor Selendis from the Haven missions, and finally Hierarch Artanis arrive, bringing the remainder of the Protoss forces. The entire Protoss arsenal is online, with Colossus, Immortals, Templar, Void Ray, Carrier, and even a mothership. This is a mission that shows the immense technological superiority of the Protoss as they cut through thousands of enemies. But without a victory condition, each inevitable unit loss brings us closer to destruction. This is the one mission in the game where you get hero units, and if they die, the mission doesn't end in failure. There is no story for them beyond this point. It's so freaking good! Some people have the misconception that I dislike this mission, and that's because if I'm doing a challenge run, it tends to be a gimme mission that I'm just trying to get through to return to the actual challenge. But from a design, story, and execution standpoint, I think In Utter Darkness is one of the best RTS missions ever designed. Once the last light of hope has been extinguished and the galaxy falls to darkness, Zeratul postulates that the Dark Voice behind it may be a Xel'Naga. It is a big shame where this story ended up going. It ended up being the weakest of StarCraft's writing by a significant margin. But part of the reason the story of the Dark Voice Amon ended up being so disappointing is because Wings of Liberty set things up so freaking well. One of the reasons this mission hits is because it makes the Protoss feel so absolutely powerful. The amount of incredible tools that were given for free would be enough to beat any other mission in the game. The Mothership and its Vortex spell may be the greatest example of this. Vortex is an absurdly powerful crowd control spell, absorbing everything in a massive area for a long duration. In any scenario where the enemies aren't literally infinite, it can lead to some massive blowouts. Exactly what you would expect from a one-off capital ship's ultimate ability. Until it was removed from the game. For the next couple minutes, we're going to be talking a bit more about modern StarCraft esports. I know that may not interest everybody, but please stick with me. I will tell you about a really cool StarCraft game in the process. This is the only part of this retrospective that I consulted multiple people over. I have friends in the StarCraft scene who are pro players, ex-pros, and content creators. The opinions that I'm going to give here are mine, but they're not just mine. Some are from people who feel like they can't speak up without getting hate, and others who don't have a platform to do so. But I'm not a modern part of StarCraft 2 esports, so I'm going to do it. Wings of Liberty had something that modern StarCraft esports sorely is lacking: absurdity. The maps like Scrap Station were absurd. Look at this. You start seconds away from your opponents by air, but the distance from ground is massive. Units like the Colossus were absurd. Motherships, Reapers, Hellions, Ravens, Infestors, Banelings, and Mutalisks were all completely busted. The game had a million things that were utterly bonkers. So these things, over time, each individually got squashed for being too good. Everything that was wild, wacky, weird, and cool was tossed aside in the pursuit of balance, for the sake of competitive integrity. And the result? A game that's less balanced than it was 14 years ago, and is far more repetitive to watch. The fact that competitive StarCraft, esports, and really any form of content for this game has lasted for so long is an absolute miracle. A testament to how incredible the underlying foundation is and how awesome the people that drive the scene are. But that doesn't mean it can't do better. For over a decade now, people have been convinced that cool is the opposite of balance. Whenever there's a problem, the flashiest thing is gutted and the problem is declared fixed. We found ourselves in a place where previous nerfs were justified because a meta was considered stale because a build dominated for a couple months. Meanwhile, we're sitting here watching the 12,000th Ghost Turtle vs Zerg game in a row, and the last interesting map that was introduced was Golden Wall in 2020. Cool is not the enemy of balance, and fun is not the enemy of fair. I want to talk about one final game of StarCraft. This time, my favorite professional game that I watched this year. It was by far and away the most memorable match that I saw, but it wasn't StarCraft 2. I'm talking Snow vs Sulky in the ASL on the map Blitz Y. First off, this map is absolutely insane. A top-bottom mirrored experience where both players expand towards the left with a big open plane in the middle of the map where titanic engagements can occur. Meanwhile, on the right center, there's a large depression with a ton of resources in it, but it can only be reached by flying transport. Ground units cannot get there without help. This Protoss vs Zerg starts off pretty normally. The Zerg player Sulky goes for a third base quickly, while the Protoss Snow opens with Corsairs to harass. These are two of the best players on Earth, so nothing crazy happens in the early stages. Eventually, Snow ends up with a powerful Protoss army against Sulky's turtle position. And while the Protoss army is slowly trying to whittle down the Zerg defenses on the left, Sulky starts to take the absolute abundance of resources in the right valley. And then the game starts to go absolutely bonkers. Masses of shuttles start dropping High Templar and Zealots onto the valley bases while Nidus Canals reinforce the Zerg positions. But as Snow commits to his eastern flank, the western army is not being reinforced, and Sulky starts slowly moving his lurker into the large open plain. To break each other, we see Reavers, Storms, Lurkers, Defilers, Scourge, Mutalisks, Corsairs, and every basic unit being used in mass. Small fights for minute positions while Snow tries to distract Sulky on the left to nail the economy on the right. They trade over and over and over and over until Snow finally finds himself microing his heart out with 2 Reavers in a shuttle supported by some Templar and Zealots on a bridge overlooking this area. Both players were maxed out in a stalemate, and they could only afford small forces over the position on the right because they were also posturing for the center left. Despite it being 2 of the best players on Earth, the play was not perfect. The situation was so novel, so chaotic, that both players had to figure out what their strategy was on the fly. It was scrappy and nail-bitingly close. Eventually, the entire map runs out of resources, with the exception of the low ground, which is barely mining due to the Protoss harassment. And after 44 grindy minutes, Sulky manages to exhaust Snow by the thinnest of margins. A game that left fans of both players going, "That was incredible." This game reminded me a lot of Wings of Liberty professional play. Each race had these absolutely overwhelmingly powerful units and abilities. The maps were wild and extreme in design. Sometimes it led to absolutely horrible games, but it also created unique scenarios that were incredibly fun and fascinating to watch. Nowadays, things have been sanitized. The extremes for all the factions have been greatly reduced, and the map variety is a joke. This is 100% because professional players are the ones who get to make the balance decisions, and they get to pick the map pool. Adaptability and cleverness are inconsistent skills, so a large majority of professionals are going to, very reasonably, force an environment to exist where things are as consistent as possible for them. Being consistent is their job after all. But because of this, we're never going to have a Soul Key versus Snow in StarCraft 2. We're never going to have another MVP versus Squirtle, or Kiwikaki versus Stefano. And we sure as heck are never going to have another professional game won because someone built a nexus in their opponent's base. The Balance Council and map contest voters have made sure that these things will never happen again, in the name of fairness, stability, and balance. So I'm going to say something that is going to make some people incredibly angry. But once again, remember that this is not just my opinion, but that of multiple people, including some on the Balance Council. Dear Microsoft, the StarCraft 2 Balance Council was a stopgap to maintain the game during the transition period between Activision Blizzard being an independent company to being a subsidiary of yours. Now that that acquisition is complete, please abolish it. In addition, please remove professional players from the map selection process. There are already over 100 finished, polished maps that are more than high enough quality to enter ladder and professional play. Maps that over the years have been vetoed by pros for being too interesting and too different. This is literally free real estate that will last you the entirety of the game's life cycle. You don't need to make a darn thing. Abolishing the Balance Council would involve having an official StarCraft balance team once again. But given that you've recently started doing balance updates for Warcraft freaking 2, I can imagine this is something you're probably okay with. I understand that initially you were an outsider. The responsible decision was to sit back and not rock the boat, and I respect that. But this boat is in a bit of a need of rocking, and you're in the position to do so. Being a professional player is about more than being able to play the same match perfectly over and over. Snowkey vs. Sol was a great game because these rock-solid players were ground to bits, being forced to play a dramatic and dynamic game they never could have prepared for. Their strategy, tactics, micro, and macro were all tested, and the result was satisfying for everyone. All I want is more of that, please. It's time for the finale. All that remains is the Dominion and Jim working together to invade Char and defeat Kerrig. Ooh, what's this arcade game? The Lost Vikings is a fully functional shoot-'em-up arcade game made as a fun little bonus to play. The game is remarkably well made for being a side project. It was something the players could hop into and mess around with, have a good time, and move on from whenever they feel like they'd had enough. But most importantly, it was an incredible lesson on how to take what should have been a well-received feature, a bonus for the fans, and absolutely ruin it with a few poor decisions. The Lost Vikings name is a play on one of Blizzard's earliest games, The Lost Vikings, a 2D platformer where you control 3 different characters to solve puzzles. This version is about piloting a single Viking through 3 stages of progressively more difficult enemies. During the stages, you fight all manner of Protoss, Zerg, and Terran forces, eventually landing at a variety of boss fights, including a Protoss carrier, a Zerg Leviathan, and finally the Terratron. An absolutely awesome April Fool's joke that Blizzard made during StarCraft's development. The game's main mechanic, besides blowing up enemies, is that pickups will occasionally drop to enhance weapons, give protective drones, or powerful bombs. To get them, you have to stop hugging the bottom of the screen and dive into the middle. The game's difficulty is in a little bit of a weird place. For people who are not familiar with the genre, it's pretty hard. But for anyone who's a shoot-'em-up veteran, it's an absolute breeze. This is partially because of that pickup system. But in the end, that's fine. It's just a silly little arcade game with no ties to progression. Being hard doesn't really matter. Except it does. Because StarCraft's achievements are so well designed and enjoyable, one of the most natural second stops after completing the campaign is to try to get 100% achievements. And getting a gold score is required to get the Lost Viking achievement. And gold score means you have to successfully beat the game, not once, not twice, but 3 times back to back without failing, which is almost 45 minutes of sustained concentration and decent play at a genre the player has most likely never touched before. It's exhausting. and is the reason that a huge number of people are sitting at 99% campaign achievements. And the sad thing is, the fix is really simple. Remember the hidden feat of strength achievement for things like killing the Protoss base on Welcome to the Jungle? Just make it one of those. Then getting 100% would be based entirely on playing StarCraft, and the people that cared enough to get Lost Vikings achievements on gold could get an even more exclusive achievement for it. It's a win for everybody. The Lost Vikings doesn't ruin the game or anything, but it's a shame to see this fun little side project be the cause of so much player frustration because of an easily fixable mistake. It's time to hit up the finale, this time for real, I promise. The Raiders and Dominion under Prince Valerian are taking the fight to Kerrigan by invading the Zerg homeworld of Char. To begin the invasion, we're formally introduced to General Warfield, who we've seen on TV and fought on Core Hall. And after a cheeky call to taunt the Emperor, it's time to get absolutely annihilated by the Zerg. The Swarm's defenses are faster and more aggressive than anticipated, and the Dominion fleet quickly falls into disarray. It's time to make it planetside and regroup. Gates of Hell is a wonderful introductory mission to Char. We begin with a base, but instead of being safely nestled in the corner of the map with high ground to help us defend, we're stuck in the middle of multiple Zerg bases being hit from every side from the get-go. In addition to fortifying our bases, there are a series of drop pods crashing down from orbit. We need to rendezvous with these troops and get them back to base because resources are limited. We're not building much here. This mission feels like the space-based version of D-Day. There is so much to do, and the enemy is relentless. All we can do is gather our forces and survive. After we've rescued a few sets of drop pods and our army reaches a decent size, Warfield's battlecruiser comes crashing down onto the far side of the map. And the only information that we're given is that we have to rescue him. From then on, the Zerg aggression against us increases, the drop pods become more and more frequent, and start requiring us to split our army into multiple groups to secure them, otherwise one will get overwhelmed. It is so easy to be peeled apart here by the Swarm. It's so easy to focus on one of the three things you're juggling simultaneously, lose a squad, and be stuck fighting the rest of the mission from a deficit. Once all of the drop pods have landed, whether they've been rescued or not, it's time to meet up with Warfield. And just like SuperNova, I appreciate how the mission simply does not give instruction on how to do it. It does give us vision of a canyon that moves through the bottom and right side of the map. It's a long trek through waves of infested broodlords and ultralisks, finally reaching the Nidus worms that are sieging our ally. But the map is intentionally designed so that is a viable route, but it's not the only way. There's a Zerg hive cluster to the northwest that can be cleared out. This only leaves a small gap between the player and the objective, allowing Medivacs or Hercules to easily transport ground forces over. Or a more dedicated air style can move through the northern areas and secure Warfield's position from behind. We can tell these were intentionally added in. If they didn't want the air path to exist, they would have just made the map less tall. There's literally nothing of value up there besides this path. But Gates of Hell is a mission where from the get-go, it's up to you to figure out what you're gonna do. They made sure there was a variety of viable answers, but none of them are easy to execute. Heck, if you have the orbital strike upgrade, which I didn't get for this run, you can literally use drop pods to deliver infantry straight to Warfield. Actually, this one is pretty easy to execute, but the other ones aren't. Gates of Hell perfectly showcases how incredibly difficult a planetary landing against a fortified world would be, and makes you feel cool for having successfully pulled one off, no matter how flawed it may be. As the Terran forces move to rescue the general, it's clear that he's been having some trouble. Actually no, he just punched a Hydralisk in the face, what a badass. But some Hydralisk spines in his arm are going to prove debilitating for the general. Once the boys rescue him and call in a cool little Banshee airstrike, Warfield is like, hey yeah, so I'm poisoned from these Hydralisk spines, so I told the medics to cut off my arm so I can get back into the fight. You're in command while I go get that done. Did I mention that Warfield is a badass? Because this man is an absolute Chad. The combined Terran forces have established control over some amount of ground, but they want a chance to fight against Kerrigan herself. And to do that, they need to land a blow against the Swarm first. There's an orbital platform where many Zerg flyers nest. Taking it out would dramatically reduce their air power for the final fight. And under the ground are a series of tunnels that the Zerg Nidus worms move through. If they're flooded, then we'd be safe from subterranean ambushes during the climax. But we don't have the resources to do both, which brings us to our final split choice of this run. Of course we're going to be doing both of these for this video, as is normal. But for the final mission, I'm going to have destroyed the orbital platform, simply because I think the Nidus attacks are more cinematic than the air raids. Once we reach the platform, we get a sit rep. This is an old Terran orbital platform the Zerg have taken residence on, and their nests run deep. There are a few cooling towers for the automated reactors keeping the station in orbit. If we blow the towers, the reactors will go too, taking the platform with it. Shatter the Sky is a mission that I enjoy a lot. Not because it has some big cool moment or incredible vibes, but because it's just a big open map with lots of Zerg, a lot of bases, and the game just says, go get 'em, chief! This is the biggest macro mission in the game, and you're free to use any composition that you want. What I'm getting at is, this is the prime battlecruiser mission. Not only can we actually afford a maxed out fully upgraded battlecruiser army, but it makes lore sense too. This is where we re-establish contact with the fleet that's still in orbit, and they got lots of battlecruisers to come join us. Similar to the other big macro mission, Media Blitz, the 4 Zerg bases around these coolant towers are themed, somewhat. In reality, the top left base is ground units, the bottom right is flyers, and the close base is low-tech stuff, and the farthest away one is just strong enemies. It's a lot less extreme on the theme than before. This mission may be the most reminiscent of a late-game StarCraft 1 mission, where the objectives would often just be clear the entire map of every enemy possible. It makes sense that this one harkens back to an older time, because it is implied that this is the same platform that the final Brood War mission Omega was fought on. Though here it is significantly smaller and less impressive. The coolant towers we have to destroy serve as an abridged answer to hunting down every enemy unit and building. Instead, you need to be able to do some significant damage to a target in the center of an enemy base, which usually means you've had to clear out their defending army. After the second tower goes down, the Leviathan spawns. This is another big capital ship fight, and unlike the motherships, it does fight back. The Leviathan roams around the map, constantly spawning flyers to attack us until it's dealt with. The fight itself isn't anything that special, but part of the challenge is being potentially caught off guard with insufficient anti-air for the flyer spam. My battlecruisers had no such issue. It's not an incredible fight, but it is far better than the Protoss attempts at boss battles. One cool piece of continuity is that if you choose to invade the tunnels instead, then the Leviathan will appear as a boss encounter in the final mission, which is super cool. The rest of the mission is pretty bog standard. It really is a mission designed to test macro, one's ability to scoop up as many resources as possible and convert them into a fighting force. Doing this quickly and efficiently means a Zerg can't stand up to our firepower. At this point, it would be time for the final fight. But of course, I want to see what it would have been like to blast those Nidus worms first. You might think that the 2 penultimate missions would share a lot of similarities. If one is a big-scale macro mission in the skies, then maybe the other is the same underground. But these caves are tiny, and Jim doesn't want to risk a large squad getting detected. So he opts to take a small squad down, the most elite combat veterans the Raiders have. And Swan and Stetman, for some reason. This mission is interesting, both in terms of design and where it's put in the campaign. You may have noticed that we've basically never talked about the Hyperion's chief scientist, Stetman. And that's because throughout the entire campaign, he's basically got nothing to say. Whenever a Zerg bonus objective comes up, he generally pipes in about wanting it, but then when we're back on the Hyperion, he never has anything useful to say. Swan, on the other hand, we have learned a little bit more about. We're told that he was part of a mining operation where he led an uprising, one that the Rainers came to support, and he ended up joining up with them. But overall, these 2 characters have a lot less support than basically everyone else on the Hyperion. Belly of the Beast is our first opportunity to fight with and hear banter from these characters in a real way, which I think is good for the game. It makes me care about them significantly more. The second time that I played through Wings of Liberty, because first of all, this happens very late in the campaign, and second of all, being part of a split mission means that I just didn't play this on my first playthrough. I'm glad that this mission exists, but I feel like it should be earlier on. Now, there's no great scene with Swan and Stetman or anything, no massive revelations, but we do learn that they're both obviously terrified of being down in these caves and are willing to put their trust and lives into Jim's hands. The mission itself is pretty straightforward. There's a long winding corridor that the 4 heroes have to fight through. Zerg stand in their path. Each of them has a different ability. Jim has a long-range, high-damage penetrator round, Tychus has a grenade and chain gun that deals damage in an area, Swan can deploy his girlfriend, Flamin' Betty, to tank, and Stetman is a super medic. Basically, the ranger, the sorcerer, the tank, and the healer. Once they reach the end of the tunnel, the first seismic charge is deployed, and we gotta defend the area until it activates. Once done, we rinse and repeat 2 more times. Each section has a different challenge, such as the Gauntlet of Infested in part number 2, or the fight against the massive Omegalisk that's trying to break through some rocks to get to the juicy marines on the other side. All of these challenges and situations are pretty fun and fine, but there's definitely a lack of any sort of exploration or discovery. Overall, the mission is pretty fun but nothing special until the 3rd seismic chamber. An enormous queen boss fight appears that's totally not Zagara, and the fight is really solid. The queen hits like a monster truck and hatches eggs to overwhelm the squad. The fight is just really fun and goes to show that Blizzard absolutely is able to make RTS bosses work, which is something that they'll put a bigger focus on in Heart of the Swarm. One thing I really appreciate about this mission is that when the hero units are defeated, they fall over and can be revived by standing near them. Without this mechanic, the mission would go from a fun little adventure to an absolute slog very quickly. After the queen falls, there's a short escape sequence where the lava floods the caves and everybody scrambles to make it out. Which I guess technically means the lava mechanic does get used twice in this campaign. But of course, everybody makes it and the Nidus worms are disabled. It's time for All In. Once again, this was not the real route that we took, so the Nidus worms are definitely still on the menu for the finale. Before the final stand, things are looking desperate. Casualties are high and ammo is low. If we're gonna make this work, they have exactly 1 shot at it. Warfield's dropship returns, and he's brought the completed artifact. And this absolute legend has replaced his arm with a freaking cannon. I'm sorry, I cannot get over how they portray Warfield. It's so good. This next bit is a bit of a Heart of the Swarm spoiler. If you don't want that, please skip forward about 30 seconds. Warfield is memed on a bit because of his appearance in Heart of the Swarm and how he felt like a bit of a joke because the missions happened very early in the campaign, so it was weird having him die to super low-tech stuff. But despite all of that, his death was still the single best moment in Heart of the Swarm. The fact that he's sitting there with a steel beam impaling him on death's doorstep and is still threatening the Queen of Blades and successfully gets what he wants from her is incredible. Nobody else comes even close to pulling stuff off like that. Warfield is just cooler than any of us will ever be, and that's something we're going to have to live with. Along with the artifact and extra firepower, Warfield has brought us intel about what we're about to face in the final battle. The Zerg surrounding Kerrigan are numberless and relentless. We have no shot other than to hunker down, bunker up, and defend. As a Xel'Naga artifact charges, it can occasionally support us by releasing energy novas, dealing massive damage to all Zerg in an area. But besides that, we're on our own. We have to survive for 30 minutes against the strongest of the Swarm, throwing everything that it has against us, including Kerrigan herself. All In is nothing short of a masterpiece. It's the culmination of our entire journey. Every skill that we've learned, every unit and upgrade we've unlocked needs to be used to its fullest to fight against the Swarm. Unless you got the Hellion upgrades, those are still kinda useless. We start off with a well-developed base and a number of units at the 2 choke points that we're defending. And the Zerg take this opportunity to start hitting hard and fast. Within 3 minutes, strong attack waves are already washing against our bunkers. Both large attack waves and a constant trickle of Zerg will be consistently taxing us by forcing repairs. But the mission gets really hard a few minutes later when the Nidus worms start erupting from the ground. These worms will spawn both inside and outside of our base, requiring us to stay tightly packed, keeping our production covered, and getting a mobile strike force to move out and take down the external worms while we're constantly holding on to our main battle lines. These worms will start quickly spawning Zerg troops and will never stop if left alive. Unattended worms can quickly make the strongest positions impossible to hold. So we're building an army, fortifying positions, managing a base, getting upgrades, and moving a Banshee strike force around to try to eliminate the worms while dodging detection, all before the 6-minute mark. And eventually, Kerrigan herself appears for the first attack. It isn't worth going over all of Kerrigan's abilities. All that matters is that she is by far and away the most durable unit in the game, and she breaks through buildings, smashes starships, and thrashes tanks. Kerrigan has a countermeasure to every unit type in the game. Unless you have a detailed understanding of exactly how she works, then the only answer is to throw whatever you have at her and control it as well as you can to minimize the damage. When the Queen of Blades approaches death, she burrows away and prepares for her next strike. The first two encounters with her are far easier than the coming ones, and they are still a menace. And that's it. That's all of All In's mechanics. The Zerg aggression ramps up more and more, the Nidus worms increase in frequency, causing units erupting from the worms to cover new worms, making them harder to assault. Kerrigan attacks again and again, eventually gaining the incredible area damage ability Razor Swarm. Bunkers will die, tanks will fall, breaches will happen, and there's no chance but to scramble to fill the gap, rebuild, and reinforce. It is tense, action-packed, and relentless. It is the perfect representation of the Swarm. You cannot falter against them, and you can't get careless. You need to watch your Vespene gas count, balance troops on each side, make sure that there's enough SCVs to repair, and remember to knock down those Nidus worms. Kerrigan is back, and that means stuff is going to die, and Overlords are dropping infested Terran. Make sure to rebuild a couple of the SCVs, they've died. Oh, their depot's under attack, you gotta make sure to save that, and the Niduses are back, and more Niduses are back, and more Niduses are back, and more Niduses are back. All In is the most relentless, unforgiving, and brutal mission in StarCraft 2. And nothing feels better than the moment that the artifact charge hits 100% and you know you've finally done it. No matter how close the game, no matter how dire the situation, every All-In win is earned. And that's why, in my opinion, it is the greatest single mission in real-time strategy. As the artifact emits its final nova, annihilating all Zerg in its path, a small squad move into Kerrigan's lair to assess the damage. Jim and Tychus find the de-infested Kerrigan, laying immobilized. And in these last few moments of the campaign, before it all ends, we need to do one more character assessment. Let's talk Tychus Findlay. When Tychus was introduced, he was newly released from prison, with no knowledge of or attachment to the modern day. He was cold and ruthless. He didn't care about anyone besides himself and his buddy Jim. When the rebels on Marsara or Hanson's colonists needed help, he scoffed at the idea. To him, they were better off as bait. But throughout the campaign, Tychus very subtly starts to change. He never loses his wanton appetite for destruction. He's always the first to suggest charging into the fight, but his attitude about those around him softens. By the time we reach the end of the colonist questline, he's joking about who the doctor's into, and raises no complaints about going back to save them. By the time we're invading Core Hall and spreading the message about what Mengska's done, he's in full revolutionary spirit, though the giant robot may have been part of that. One of the reasons I kept Tosh around is for the additional pieces of dialogue he has after the various missions, and he's been saying that Tychus has been fighting an inner battle for some time now. A struggle against a choice that he doesn't want to make. Tychus originally told us that he was stuck in his marine suit until he collected the artifact fragments for Mobius, but that is long done, and in the suit he remains. All of these things together are why it's so incredibly important to remember that Tychus has always been the kind of man who shoots first and talks later. Because for the first time ever, Tychus chooses to talk.
I made a deal with the devil, Jimmy. She dies, I go free.
We all got our choices to make.
Damn shame.
The most common interpretation of this ending, and the one that I choose to subscribe to, is that Tychus was putting the ultimate choice into his best friend's hands. Tychus's suit was a prison designed by Mengsk, a tool that will allow him to live as long as he kills Kerrigan, and if he ever strays the path, the suit will kill him. At the beginning of Wings of Liberty, there would have not been a moment of hesitation. He would have taken the shot and been a free man. But slowly and surely, as he came to understand what his friend had built, what he was fighting for, and what he loved, he began to doubt. Tychus never cared about Kerrigan, but he did care about Jim. And he knew in the end he had to betray the only friend he had, or die. And in his final moments, he gave Jim the choice. It's very fair to say that the choices Raynor made at the end of the campaign were cliché, that he too easily forgot Kerrigan's past betrayals, and that there's no road for redemption. But the story of Tychus Findlay was a masterclass in using a loud, brutish, and aggressive character to mask a slow transformation of his heart. StarCraft 2 as a whole may be the story of Jim and Kerrigan, but I think that Wings of Liberty is the story of Tychus. And from that perspective, it was done damn well. Wings of Liberty took the world by storm when it released, in a way that no other strategy game had before or since. It was ambitious beyond measure, designed with care and incredible attention to detail. No game is perfect, but StarCraft 2's design is the distilled essence of what it means to have fun with a real-time strategy game. It's a game that's changed tens of thousands of lives and whose echoes are still being felt. StarCraft 2 is an incredibly important game to me. It is literally the springboard that launched my career. I wanted this video to be a love letter to the game that's given me so much, and I hope that I managed to properly convey my feelings, because StarCraft 2 truly is something special. That's it. I never know how to end these really long videos because I've just been talking for hours on end. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.
There's only one man arrogant enough to think he can get away with this.
It ain't over till it's over, you son of a bitch.
You know I've always got a card to play.
The unstoppable Hyperion.
That's my ship, Jim.
About time we kick this revolution into overdrive. Hit him with the Yamato cannon.
Hey, y'all out there. If you're gonna get through the summer, you need stamina. You need strength. You need Tychus Findlay's Bust Your Ass Workout. You want a beach buddy for the first time in your timid little life? Well, I got the toughest fitness program in the multiverse. But you cannot argue with results. I guarantee I can turn anybody into a rock-solid hero!
Looks like you need a timeout.